Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News with you all the way through until 6 p.m. But let's get right into it because we've got some big breaking news to bring you straight off the bat. Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We'll bring you the very latest information on that. In other news, are you willing to go bankrupt to save the planet? We reveal the eye-watering cost and potential fines that you might pay for not keeping up with this big net zero agenda. And yes, in other news for us, ladies and gentlemen, do you know that schools are now not going to tell parents if their child decides to become transgender or change gender? So you could turn up on Parents' Evening and Sam could be Samantha. I think that's an absolute liberty, personally. And yes, finally, as well, the Diggers have moved in as a migrant centre in Wethersfield, so they didn't take long, did they? We'll bring you all the latest on that and much, much more. Make sure you stay tuned. Fast-paced show this today. Yeah, Patrick Christys here with you all the way through until 6 p.m. GB Views at GBNews.uk. How do you feel about the idea that schools are not going to tell parents if their child wants to change gender? And are you willing to go bankrupt to save the planet? GB Views at GBNews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Thomas Cashman has been found guilty at Manchester Crown Court of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 34-year-old fatally shot the schoolgirl as he chased a convicted drug dealer into her home in Liverpool last August. The jury also found him guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee and wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm to Ms Corbell, Olivia's mother. The King visited a NATO military base during his historic state visit to Germany. King Charles met with the deputy head of the German-British battalion and other military personnel from the unit. He also met Ukrainian refugees housed at an arrival centre at Berlin's former Tegel airport. Earlier, he became the first British monarch to address the German parliament. Speaking to politicians in both English and German, he celebrated the special bond between the two countries. The government has announced new plans to cut greenhouse gases and lower energy costs. The new net zero plan, called Powering Up Britain, will invest in renewables and nuclear in a bid to make the country less reliant on foreign energy supplies. Investment will go into carbon capture technology and offshore wind, as well as hydrogen production. The Prime Minister says the plan will provide long-term security. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has announced his party will freeze council tax bills. He unveiled the pledge at a launch of Labour's local elections campaign in Swindon earlier. The move will be funded by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies.
Labour would freeze council tax next year using that windfall tax that hasn't been collected. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax, not a penny more than the bill you paid last year. And that is a tax cut for the 99% of working people, compared with the tax cut for the richest 1% that we get under the Tories.
Police say 2 men who were shot dead in Cambridgeshire last night were father and son. The force has arrested 3 people on suspicion of conspiracy to murder, saying the incidents in Sutton and in Bluntisham were linked and targeted. The force has also recovered a firearm and is now working to establish whether it was legally owned. Notorious prisoner Charles Bronson has lost a parole board bid to be freed from jail. Bronson, who changed his name to Salvador in 2014, is one of the longest-serving prisoners in the UK's history. The parole board said it wasn't satisfied that Mr Salvador was suitable for release. Jailed when he was 22 years old, he spent most of the last 48 years in isolation. His son, George Bambi, told GB News they've accepted the decision.
I completely and utterly respect the decision that they come to. You know, that's the world that we live in. You know, these people are experts and they're the ones ultimately that make the decisions. You know, I wanted him to be released. There'll be something that will be coming out in the media within the next 24 hours that will shine a whole new, complete outlook on the whole situation with Charles Bronson.
An American reporter working for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested in Russia on suspicion of spying for Washington. Evan Gershkovich pleaded not guilty during his court appearance, according to the state-owned media channel. The Journal says it's deeply concerned for the 31-year-old's safety and denies the allegations. The court ruled Gershkovich to be held in custody until the end of May. Climate change protesters have disrupted Humza Yousaf's debut First Minister's questions as leader.
Hoping there might be another intervention from the gallery just to stop that long rant from Humza Yousaf that didn't address the question at all, because I specifically asked... Here they go.
The presiding officer had to clear the public gallery at Holyrood after five interruptions. Mr Yousaf said the heckling stopped the Scottish Parliament from operating. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross challenged the new First Minister over his choice of cabinet appointments. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's over to you, Patrick.
A very good afternoon, everybody. Now, we start with the news that broke just a few minutes ago. Thomas Cashman has been convicted of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Olivia was shot dead at her home in Liverpool last August. I am joined now by GB News' home and security editor, Mark White. So, Mark, I mean, the verdict came back relatively speedily in this case.
Yeah, the jury convinced that despite his denials, this was indeed the man who had been in a dispute with a fellow career criminal, a local drug dealer by the name of Joseph Nee. Cashman had set out to kill him that day. He'd gone equipped with firearms to shoot this man dead. Of course, Joseph Nee was nearby the house that Olivia Pratt-Corbell had lived in, and the mother, Cheryl, had heard the commotion when, of course, Cashman opened fire in pursuit of this drug dealer. She opened the door at that point. Joseph Nee took the opportunity to run into the house. And, of course, young Olivia at that point had been coming down the stairs, wondering what the commotion was, telling her mother that, you know, she was scared. At that point, Thomas Cashman, the jury had heard, had continued to open fire. One of the shots struck Olivia's mother in the hand. She suffered an injury there, but that bullet continued on and impacted this 9-year-old's chest, and she died despite the efforts of paramedics to save her. She died a short time later in hospital. Absolutely horrific case that this family will have to live with for a long time. Yeah, indeed. And just shortly after the verdict, Merseyside's Chief Constable Serena Kennedy described Thomas Cashman, who has been found guilty of this murder, as a coward. She said he's despicable. He made great play in the trial that he's a dad, and yet he's put Olivia's family through this trial. That, of course, because he pled not guilty. I hope he reflects every morning when he wakes up behind bars and every night when he goes to sleep about what he's put Olivia's family through. It's worth noting as well that in a separate trial, a man has admitted to driving Cashman away from the address. And so there we go. It could be a little while potentially before we get the sentencing, do we think? Yeah, you will get undoubtedly background reports on Thomas Cashman. There will be mitigation clearly put forward by his defence team as to why they feel he should have months, years knocked off his sentence. He's not pleaded guilty, of course. He denied it right to the end, so he doesn't get that usual 25% discount on his sentence. And there are all the aggravating factors. The fact that he, in a premeditated fashion, had set out to kill this man, Joseph Nee, a fellow criminal, but had continued recklessly firing through the door of this house, even though he had seen a mother, an innocent woman, answering the door. And, of course, the fact that a 9-year-old girl lost her life in the most horrific of circumstances. These are all aggravating factors that will, I'm sure, result in a very significant sentence when that is handed down at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth noting as well that Thomas Cashman, who did deny everything here, came up with a variety of different excuses. He said he was at home, with a friend, I should say, counting money and smoking cannabis while some of these incidents were taking place. He says, I'm a dad, not a killer. And 2 firearms used by Cashman on the evening have still not been recovered. So there you go. So obviously the police are hoping now, and this is what the police are saying, to continue to remove guns and drugs from the streets and try to use this as a way of making sure that 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel, who died in such horrific circumstances at home, completely out of the blue, just shot, in the chest in her own house, that her death is not in vain. They are trying to use this to clean up the streets, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a significant gun crime problem in Liverpool. There has been for a number of years. People might think that, London is the epicentre of gun crime, and it does have a very significant problem in the capital. But other centres of population like Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool have problems with gun crime, and it's criminals who use guns and indeed knives to enforce their trade, to settle disputes, as clearly in this case there was a dispute between Cashman, a career criminal, a drug dealer, and another drug dealer, Joseph Nee, that ended in such tragic circumstances. Interestingly, Patrick, there was a key witness in this case who was a woman that had a sexual relationship with Cashman. She, under very strict terms of anonymity, and she will be relocated after this, had testified that Cashman had run back to her place after the shooting, had said that he had done Nee, that he had killed Joseph Nee, that he wanted a change of clothing, and she testified to those ends as well. The guns that were used in this crime have never been recovered at this stage. Absolutely.
Look, Mark, thank you very much for bringing us up to date there. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. If you are just joining us, that is the breaking news that dropped just minutes ago, which is that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel, who was shot dead in Liverpool last August. Now, Sophie Reaper, our North West of England reporter, has been looking back at this case, and I just want to give you a bit of a warning now that some viewers may find some of what we're about to show you quite distressing.
A tragedy that rocked this proud city and its people. On the 22nd of August last year, 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel was fatally shot in her family home in Dovecot, Liverpool.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
13 days later, Thomas Cashman was arrested and was later charged with the little girl's murder. Over the past few weeks, a jury at Manchester Crown Court has heard the details of this senseless tragedy. That night, CCTV shows shot after shot being fired at the gunman's target, Joseph Nee. Wounded, Nee tried to escape, and seeing an open door, he sought refuge there. This was the door to Cheryl Korbel's home. She'd opened it to see what was happening outside. Realising what was going on, she tried desperately to keep the 2 men out. Frightened, 9-year-old Olivia had come down the stairs. A shot was fired, injuring Cheryl and hitting the little girl in the chest. That shot would prove fatal to Olivia. In the following days, Merseyside police began their investigation to find the gunman, appealing to the local community for information.
The killing of a 9-year-old child is an absolute tragedy and crosses every single boundary. And I would urge them to do the right thing so we can put this person behind bars.
Meanwhile, as the hunt for the gunman continued, a heartbroken community gathered together to lay Olivia Pratt-Corbell to rest. Now, 7 months on, Merseyside police continue to push their crackdown on crime.
Beforehand, crime reporting was relatively low. Intelligence coming forward was relatively low. But since the unfortunate events, our engagement with this community has massively improved. It shows that the community want change.
It's hoped now that the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell will be a watershed moment for gun crime on Merseyside streets, so that no other family will have to feel the pain that hers did. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Yes, there we go. Well, we can go live now outside Manchester Crown Court, or maybe we'll go there shortly anyway. We are expecting statements to be made by relevant police officers outside Manchester Crown Court as well, and, of course, potentially the family of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, or indeed people close to them. So we'll be keeping you across that as and when we get it. But if you're just joining us, that is the breaking news, that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool, and with it bringing the end to what has been a desperately awful situation and a desperately awful case. We will wait for updates on sentencing, etc. Rest assured, we'll bring that to you as and when we get it. Right, well, look, we're going to move away from that now, though, and we're going to talk about something that's going on, frankly, in every single household in the UK, and that is how far you are willing to go, OK, to secure the net zero targets. Are you willing to bankrupt yourself? Now, the government's very controversial new net zero plan, which has been met with intense criticism from some environmental groups, by the way, because they're never particularly happy that we've gone far enough, are they? The update to the net zero strategy, which has been branded this year by the High Court as inadequate, is meant to address the imbalance between gas and electricity costs in household bills, aiming to make electricity cheaper for the long term. But the problem is here, this is going to cost you, or could do, rather a lot of money. While some campaigners are considering taking the government to court over its new energy and climate policy, who say the plan is not good enough, the Prime Minister insists people should be proud of what the UK is doing.
People should be really proud of the UK's track record on all of this. If you look at it, we've decarbonised faster than any other major economy. Our carbon emissions have been reduced by over 40%, much more than all the other countries that we compete with. At the same time, we've grown our economy. So we've got a good track record on this, and actually today's announcement demonstrates our leadership in multiple areas that are going to help improve our energy security and get bills down.
OK, so that's Rishi Sunak's line, and they are standing there and saying things like, look what we're doing. Look what we're doing to try and get ourselves carbon neutral. Look what we're doing to get to net zero. But there is very much a human cost behind all of this, and surely we're going to delve into all of that, whether it's your electric car, whether it's your 15-minute cities, whether it's the fact that you might be fined if you don't switch from a gas boiler or gas heating, etc. You might have to go and get a heat pump. I mean, it's just non-stop, isn't it? And I know a lot of people are feeling the pinch, and I've been asking you, GBViews at gbnews.uk, are you willing to go bankrupt to get to net zero? But to get more on all of these different announcements that are taking place today, because there's been quite a lot of it, is our political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, where to start? Should we start really with the latest on gas for households?
Yes, so what the new measures essentially entail is, at the moment, electricity is taxed quite highly by the government, but gas, heating your homes by gas, isn't. And the government is now planning to sort of turn that on its head. So gas will be less attractive to consumers than electricity. Now, the reasoning behind that is it's a push from the government to get people to go over from heating their house with gas to heating their house with electricity, i.e. heat pumps. But obviously there are quite a few issues with that. One of them, which you mentioned there in your opening comments, is that installing a heat pump is very, very expensive. Another is that lots of engineers say that they just don't really work.
So it's pricey and might not work, but apart from that, it's great.
It's also, not quite, it's also very difficult to retrofit into older homes. So it's all very well if your house has been built in the last sort of 30 years, but putting heat pumps into Victorian and Edwardian homes is almost impossible. So, yes, the way the government is selling this is that gas is going to get more expensive, but electricity is going to get cheaper. The truth is that most people's houses are heated by gas. So for most people, energy is going to get more expensive. And, of course, we're coming to the end of those government subsidies for our energy bills. So we could see gas bills, for this alone, these policy measures alone could see gas bills hiking by £100 a year. Plus, we'll be losing the subsidy from the government.
And it's worth noting as well, ladies and gentlemen, that £100 a year, it could be more for you, it might be a little bit less. Some people will be watching and listening to this now thinking, well, that's not a huge amount of money, I might spend that out at dinner or something. But for a lot of people, that is a heck of a lot of money. And you add it as well to the price of fuel going up, you add it as well to maybe having to get an electric car, to just general bills as well, and various different other measures that are coming in, 15-minute cities, that are designed to try to help us hit a net zero target. And people, including a chap I'm about to speak to anyway from Net Zero Watch, are very, very concerned, Olivia. Is this, though, from a political sense, is this really a vote winner?
Well, what Grant Shapps has done in this pack of measures is actually not as green as lots of environmental activists and Conservative MPs on the left of the party were hoping for. This is actually quite a sort of conservative pack of measures because Grant Shapps and the rest of the government is now very, very worried about energy security and have taken on board the concerns of those on the right of the party who believe that, for example, getting people over to electric cars is simply not practical when the technology simply isn't there, the infrastructure isn't there for charging, for example. We've also got this issue where the EU had promised to do something similar to us, to get people over to incentivise people to move over to electric cars by whacking great levies on car manufacturers using making petrol and diesel cars. But they've watered down their legislation. So it'll be now easy in the EU for car manufacturers to make petrol and diesel cars. That means that our car manufacturers will be competing with EU manufacturers making...
And this just plays into that narrative of when people voted to leave the European Union, if you did vote to leave the European Union, I bet one of the things you really thought you were going to be able to do was take back control and make our own laws and stuff. It didn't mean that we were going to hurtle further and faster towards a net zero agenda, faster than our continental friends. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Rutley there, our political reporter. Now, I believe I'm going to take you over to Germany. I am indeed, yes, where King Charles is visiting an organic farm, very on brand, called Brodewyn Farm. And the King is there to learn about how they've reduced the environmental impact of agriculture through organic farming. I'm now looking at shots of the King at said organic farm as he shakes their hands, presses the flesh, doesn't he? And this is part of his historic trip to Germany. He was supposed to go to France first, but of course, due to unfortunate rioting and Bordeaux and Paris being on fire, he had to go to Germany instead. And he actually made history yesterday. Our King. On today, in fact, he made history because he spoke at the Bundestag, which is, of course, the first time a British monarch has actually done that. He spoke in both English and German, and it was fantastic, really. He kind of made a few jokes along the way as well. He referenced, of course, his late mother, the Queen, and how fond she was of the German and English relationship, or British relationship, I should say. He referenced the Beatles, Kraftwerk. He jokes about the Lionesses' Euros win in 2022, which was, of course, over Germany. And he did say something as well that I thought was quite nice, which he said that we've been laughing with and at each other as friends for a very long period of time. And this is all about soft power and soft diplomacy, these trips, and it is really great. I think we forget in this country, don't we? We take a lot of time tearing ourselves down and admonishing ourselves and desperately trying to make us apologise for historic wrongs that may or may not have been anything to do with us to begin with. And then you see the King and Camilla now going abroad and how much they are loved internationally, and that is such a great thing for Britain. King Charles is actually making history in what he's been doing so far, and it is going to be great, I think we can all agree, for English and continental European relations going forward. So King Charles, though, what you are currently looking at are live shots of him at an organic farm in Germany called Brodewyn Farm, which is part of this trip. He's off to Hamburg later this evening, and a little bit later on in the show, we will be going to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who will bring you the latest. But we're going to move on from that now. We'll keep you up to date, of course, as and when King Charles does anything. But I know someone who wasn't too impressed with the topic that we were talking about a little bit earlier on, which is the government's new energy plan, and that is Benny Pizer, who's the director of Net Zero Watch. And look, I'm keen to drill down today, Benny, on numerous different things. It's the cost for people of hurtling towards a net zero agenda. And again, I would urge people as well today to keep their eyes and ears peeled on this show, because we are looking at what it will cost you to do things like switch from gas. If you don't switch from gas, are you going to be fined? Are you going to be penalised? Can you even have a heat pump in your home when you add that to the electric car that you're probably going to have to get? It all really does add up. But Benny, I want to know from you, about the science behind all of this, because we are only doing this on the provision that it makes a difference and that difference is necessary. Will it make a difference, and do we need to make one?
Well, it's a good question, because if you look around the world, you can see that the whole climate agenda is basically falling apart. The EU is watering down its policies. They're beginning to realize that there are public upheavals. Look at the Dutch. Look at what's going on in France. So Germany is going back to coal. The car industry has managed to kill the ban of the combustion engine. So everywhere you look, the Chinese are burning coal as if there's no tomorrow. No one actually is doing very much about it other than the Conservative government. Of course, it's due because there are legal requirements for the government to do that. But I don't think the government can win this, because for the Greens it will never be enough, and for the public it will be very painful, because
I'm just going to pause you. I'm just going to pause you there, because I want to drill down into that. I want to look at what the UK has pledged to do, Benny, OK? So insulating 300,000 of the UK's worst insulated homes, that's a £1 billion energy efficiency programme. Then we've got removing between 20 million and 30 million tonnes of carbon from the atmosphere by 2030, providing more than £350 million for electric vehicle charging facilities, aiming to produce 25% of UK's electricity through nuclear by 2050. We're also going to have more wind farms and solar sites, etc., and as well levies when it comes to gas boilers in people's houses. So when we add all of this up, Benny, this is rather a lot for your ordinary common man and woman on the street to actually pay for, is it not?
Of course. And let me just focus on one issue, because your journalist you interviewed, your colleague, that this shift from the green levies from electricity to gas will cost about £100 per household. But that's not really true, because a lot of wealthy people will just not pay that levy at all, because they will go to electricity, and it will be the poor will have to stick to these green levies. So it's the poor will be forced to pay for the green issues on their gas bills. They will struggle with much more than £100, because they will have to subsidize the wealthy who go for the heat pumps. It's a wealth transfer from poor to rich. The rich also get these £5,000 subsidy for an electric car and for a heat pump. So it's a complete transfer from ordinary families to the few who can afford all these green things. And that's what you would expect from a Conservative government, basically.
OK, look, Benny, thank you very, very much. It's Benny Pizer there of Net Zero Watch, and the emails have been coming in thick and fast on this, on such a variety of different elements to the net zero side of things, and that's why I wanted to go big on this today, because it's easy to get lost in just the singular headlines of this. So you might be penalised if you decide to keep gas running around your house. OK, that's one bit of it. But we've got here as well an individual who I won't name on here saying that they live in Lincolnshire. They might lose arable land for solar farms, so that could be a blight to the area there as far as they're concerned. We've had Paul who's on, who says that Rishi Sunak is so rich that he doesn't seem to care about the normal people on the street and the cost of it. And there's loads of this coming up. A lot of people here saying the rush to net zero will bankrupt the country. This is from Bob. The UK produces less than 1% of the world carbon emissions. Look, I'll have to check the exact number on that, Bob, to be fair. But we will be stagnant, cold and poorer as a result of these policies. And that's what I'm trying to get at now. Even if you believe that we do need to do absolutely everything that we can do to save the planet, which is fair enough, and I know a lot of people feel that way, at what cost? At what cost? Are you willing to bankrupt yourself? Are you willing to have massive financial penalties on your day-to-day life, or inconveniences as well in terms of things like 15-minute cities, in order to hit this net zero agenda? GBViews at gbnews.uk. It's worthwhile noting that the eco-lobby think we're not going far enough. So what do you make of that as well? We're moving on from that now, though, because local residents are furious after finding out that thousands of migrants are going to be housed at a nearby military base. Easy for me to say. But get a load of this. They've already moved the diggers in, people. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. It is 32 minutes past 3. I've got loads coming your way. Sir Keir Starmer, get a load of this, says a Labour government would have frozen council tax this year. We are going to have a little bit of a look at the fact that in a lot of Labour councils, they have essentially run their finances into the ground and the council tax has shot through the roof. And schools have been slammed for not telling parents that their kids could be trans. So you go there on Parents' Evening and Sam is now Samantha. You were on the wiser. I happen to think that's an absolute liberty. But first, it's your latest headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 3:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of a 9-year-old girl who was shot in Liverpool last year. The 34-year-old killed Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her home last August. Merseyside Police has released CCTV footage of the moment Cashman chased a convicted drug dealer towards Miss Corbell's home. The jury at Manchester Crown Court also found him guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee and wounding Olivia's mother with intent to do grievous bodily harm. The Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy, says the investigation's still ongoing.
Brought the person responsible for Olivia's murder, Thomas Cashman, to justice. I know that will never bring Olivia back, but hopefully the family will get some small comfort in knowing the person that took their daughter away from them is now behind bars. We are still hunting down those people who enabled that murder to take place, who supplied the gun, where the gun is, and we will carry on until we identify those people responsible.
The King has visited a NATO military base during his historic state visit to Germany. King Charles met with the deputy head of the German-British battalion and other military personnel from the unit. He also met Ukrainian refugees at the Tegel Refugee Centre. Earlier, King Charles became the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. Speaking to politicians in both English and German, he celebrated the special bond between the two countries.
The United Kingdom and Germany are together providing leadership to secure our shared future. Today, the United Kingdom and Germany are Europe's two largest producers of power from offshore wind. These innovations are vital in combating the existential challenge of climate change and global warming, which confronts us all.
And an American reporter working for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested in Russia on suspicion of spying for Washington. Evan Gershkovich pleaded not guilty during his court appearance, according to the state-owned media. The Journal says it's deeply concerned for the 31-year-old's safety and denies the allegations. The court ruled Gershkovich should be held in custody until the end of May. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Welcome back. I've got a lot to get through. We're going to start with locals living in former military houses next to RAF Scampton. So this is the former Dam Busters site that's been in the news so much. Have hit back at the government's plans to house thousands of asylum seekers at the disused base. Now, the site in Lincolnshire was home to the famous Dam Busters, as I've said, in the Second World War. It is one of a number of sites that's going to be used to house those people who need accommodation, the tens of thousands of migrants who arrive here, and this is the crucial word, illegally, on small boats. But many residents in the area have major concerns about the safety and the preservation of the site's heritage, and also, as well, about investments in the area going forward. It's worthwhile noting that it appears that the government has wasted absolutely no time whatsoever, quite literally moving the diggers into another site in Wethersfield. So we'll bring you the latest on that as we get it. But joining me now is the Conservative Councillor for West Lindsey, Jessie Milne. Jessie, thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you on the show. So yesterday it was really kind of properly announced, wasn't it, that that site is definitely going to be used. How do you feel about that?
Well, I, along with everyone else, were absolutely furious. I mean, people are very angry and very upset. There are so many implications with this site. It's going to have a major, major impact on a lot of people's lives. I mean, there are over 1,000 people living in properties there who have children going to the Polly Platt school, which goes up to the age of 11. And there's lots of other young people around in that area. And these people are just going to be roaming free, young men roaming free. Nobody knows who they are, where they're from. And I can assure you there is a lot of anger, very, very real anger as to what is going on.
A lot is made of the human rights of the people who the government admits will have come here illegally in small boats. Many people would call them illegal immigrants, even though that's not necessarily the most PC term. What about your human rights and the human rights of the people in the surrounding area?
That is exactly a lot of the questions that I am getting, because the government, we've no doctors. You cannot get to a doctor, you cannot get to a dentist, that you just can't get anywhere near them. Yet the government are saying, how they're going to do it, I don't know, but they're saying that they're going to put a doctor on site and a dentist on site. So people are saying, well, what about our health? We don't count. People are angry because they feel they're just being walked over and nobody's listening to their concern. And I know Sir Edward Lee, our MP, is fighting really, really hard on our part, but even he is struggling to get anywhere with the government. They just will not listen to reason. And it's a site 5 miles away from Lincoln, which is the nearest. To get there, there's no buses, no local buses. There just are not any buses at all in that area. And
I'm going to ask you, Jessie, if that's all right, because you must have had a lot of time to think about what is the alternative. because a lot of people will say to you now that, well, I'm sorry, but this is part of your duty. The nation has got to take this amount of people. There's more on the way. We can't keep putting them in hotels. That's costing us £6 million a day. You know, a lot of people might be saying, well, my area's got 2 migrant hotels. Why shouldn't your part of the world? You obviously think it's not the right place. I think most people with common sense would admit that it's not the right place. So what do you do with them instead? In your view, Jessie, do you process them offshore? What do you do?
Well, there are other areas that they could look at where they can put these people in far better areas than they are. West Lindsey had an agreement, and the government had given them the Scampton airfield, they'd given them the Scampton camp, and just one day before the government came out with this, we had signed a deal for £300 million to develop that site, to have hotels, businesses, museums and everything, bringing lots of jobs into the area and a lot of money into the area. And that is another reason why a lot of people are so very, very angry. They just will not listen to reason, the government. And there are other places within the county. We've got other airfields that are no longer in use, that they could be habited there. It doesn't have to be where it's killing off a good trade, a good business, and impacting on people's lives.
So we've covered there quite clearly security and safety. We've covered the investment side of it, so the finances of the area. We've also covered just the appropriateness of it in terms of the location. It's also worth noting, I think, isn't it, as well, that it's probably not particularly appropriate for the people who are actually going to be plonked in there. Because what are they going to do all day? You know, are they going to be allowed out and free to roam? Is there anything to them? I saw a package, I think, from where you are as well the other day, and I think it's like one corner shop or something. It's not a big area, of course, is it? But can I ask how you feel about something now? Because in Wethersfield, which is another site that we were covering yesterday, I woke up this morning to images of diggers already moving in to that site, which implies to me, very unfortunately, Jessie, that you're about to see that where you are. How will you feel when you see diggers going in, renovation work taking place, and maybe the existing historical elements of that particular site being ripped out?
Well, I can't describe to you how angry and how there'll be so much trouble there when this happens. It won't be a walkover, I can tell you. People are really angry. People are now going to be actually protesting at the gates and everything. And if anyone turns up with a digger or whatever, they're going to struggle to get in there. And furthermore, we do not have the police to be able to police that area and the rest of the work that they have to do either, because our police force is very, very underfunded. It's been underfunded 10 million less this year, and we've got a minimum police officers. We're having to get rid of a good half of our PCSOs, and yet we've got all this extra work. It's crazy.
Jessie, I obviously hope that you manage to stay safe and that you do get the result that you want and everything. And I also do hope that maybe myself or another presenter here at GB News could be there to report on what sounds as though it's going to be quite a furious picket line, and unfortunately it looks like when the work begins at that site. Jessie, thank you very much. Jessie Milne there is a Conservative councillor for West Lindsey, just reacting to, that news again there that Scampton is going to be used. And you can hear the strength of feeling from the area there, can't you? And this is not going away anytime soon. Talks there of picket lines and barricades. And it comes as another site, Wethersfield, as well, has already had the diggers rolled in. But moving on, this is going to get you going, ladies and gents. Get your emails at the ready for this one. gbviews@gbnews.uk, especially if you are a parent. Can you believe that some schools aren't going to tell parents that their kids are questioning their gender or even changing their gender? You know, your kid in the school, Sandra from the geography department, is not going to tell you that Sam is now Samantha. Bonkers. I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. Now, a damning report by the Policy Exchange publication has found that schools are letting children change their gender without telling their parents. The report calls it a mass breach of safeguarding. We hear a lot about kids' rights, don't we? I'm sorry, what about parents' rights here? And it warns that schools are often uncritically accepting the beliefs about gender identity that are so contested. So beliefs like, you know, we are not born into a particular body, etc. You all know the drill by now. It also suggests that as many as 7 in 10 schools are failing to inform families when children question, are confused about or even change their gender. With me now is Lucy Marsh from the Family Education Trust. Lucy, thank you very much for joining us. I've got to be honest with you, I'm not a parent and I'm livid about this. How do you feel?
Well, we're pleased that this Policy Exchange report has finally come out because we've been campaigning about this for quite a long time now, for a number of years. We've had a lot of parents been contacting us who are really concerned about what's happening with schools. So to finally see it in the news is great, but it is outrageous, and I agree with you. It is outrageous that this has been happening for so long in schools.
Lucy, so as I understand it, parents watching this show right now could have sent their child off to school this morning under the complete belief that that child was a boy, OK, and was identifying as a boy. And then they can find out on Parents' Evening, presumably, that that child of theirs that they gave birth to and lovingly raised for the first 10 years of its life had been changing its gender to that of a girl for the last year or so in school, potentially, without the school bothering to inform the parents?
Well, often it's not even that the parents are finding out at Parents' Evening. In some cases, the parents are not finding out at all because the schools are just not telling them. We've had several examples of parents who've contacted us where their children have been transed effectively at school, and they've only found out much later when they found out from their child, or the child suddenly announced that they are going by a different name. Some children have been going to school and the schools have been facilitating them, allowing them to change into different uniforms and be identified by different pronouns at school without telling the parents at all, which is terrible.
Why aren't they telling them? Because if it's all about, I'm sorry, but if it's all about child health care and child mental health and child well-being and all of this stuff, why on earth would you encourage them to live a lie at home?
Because the schools are being advised by external organisations who are telling them not to contact parents and telling them to keep secrets from parents and telling children to keep secrets from parents. It's all coming from external organisations who have this as their policy.
And I am concerned that there's a wider push here about the breakdown of the nuclear family, and a deliberate one. Because if we take it back to its root cause here now, you have children at nursery schools essentially being shown drag shows. You've then got parents unable to opt out of LGBTQ+ events at the school. You've potentially then got someone who is not a child psychologist or therapist coming in to talk to them about whether or not they've been born into the wrong body. You've got people on Twitter making, it would appear, a lot of money out of telling kids to talk to them privately one-to-one and to go no contact with their parents. And you've now got schools also not telling parents when their child is at least saying that it's going to change gender. Is there something more sinister going on here?
Yes, it's not even that it's happening sort of in secret, that these organisations are quite plainly saying what their agenda is. You've got organisations like Educate and Celebrate that's in hundreds and hundreds of primary schools, and their mission, they're open about it on their website, their mission is to smash heteronormativity. They're saying that's their mission statement. But the problem is that the Department for Education has been funding these organisations. They've been spending money on Stonewall. They've been giving money to organisations like Educate and Celebrate to go into schools and to spread this message. So it is sinister. There is an underlying current and an agenda to break down the traditional family. That is what these organisations are trying to do, and people like the individual that you mentioned who is active on TikTok and on Instagram, who's telling children to private message him. There is not just him. There are lots of these people who have got this agenda, who are trying to separate children from their parents, and it is, you're right, it is sinister, and it is something we need to fight back.
I think it's scary stuff, and I think parents have got a long, hard battle ahead of them. Look, Lucy, thank you very much. Lucy Marsh there, the Family Education Trust. I'm going to let go of Lucy there. I'm just going to bring up very quickly, though, something that I saw earlier, which is the genderbread person, right? So get a load of this. Your kids might essentially have been exposed to this at school. It is, for our radio listeners, a classic gingerbread man. Can't call it that anymore, people. It's the genderbread person. And it's got a rainbow-coloured brain, which is labelled with identity, and this is how you, in your head, experience and define your gender, it says. And it's got attraction. It's how you find yourself feeling drawn or not drawn to some other people, then where the, I suppose, genitals would usually be, it's got a multitude of different arrows, and it says sex is the physical traits that you're born with or develop that we think as sex characteristics, as well as the sex that you are assigned at birth, the sex you're assigned at birth. There you go. Anyway, that's supposedly going to be banned now, and the term biologically male and female is banned as well. So, I mean, good luck if you're a parent out there at the minute. Anyway, we're going to move on, though, at the moment and talk about a story that broke right at the top of this show. Very, very serious story. Let's get more on this afternoon's big story. And it's Thomas Cashman has been convicted of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Olivia was sadly shot dead at her home in Liverpool last August. We're going to go live now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' North West reporter, Sophie Freeview, who's been on this case for us from the start. Sophie, what have you got?
Well, this trial began at the start of this month. It's an incredibly complex case. Obviously, the incident itself took place in August of last year, so months and months ago. At the start of this week, on Tuesday, Justice Yip sent the jury out to begin their deliberations. They took that afternoon, they took yesterday, and they've then come back this afternoon with their verdicts. They found Thomas Cashman, 34-year-old, guilty on all charges. So that's the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, wounding with intent of Olivia's mother Cheryl, and 2 counts of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Now, this has been described as a defining moment for Merseyside and their police force. The Chief Constable, Serena Kennedy, has said the conviction of Thomas Cashman in terms of the murder of Olivia is positive. We're still hunting down those people who enabled that murder to take place, who supplied the gun gun, where the gun is, and we will carry on until we identify those people responsible. Now, from the beginning of this trial, Mr. Cashman has denied his guilt. His family, when they were leaving the courtroom earlier today, they were swearing, they were angry. They had to be escorted from the premises by court staff. But it has now been found by that jury that Thomas Cashman was guilty of all of those charges, but most especially the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell.
Sophie, thank you very much. Sophie Reapy there, our North West reporter who's been bringing you updates constantly as that trial finally came to an end. Thomas Cashman found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. She was, of course, shot dead in her own home in Liverpool in a case that, for all the wrong reasons, of course, absolutely gripped the nation. We're going to move away from that now, though, and talk to a big claim from Sir Keir Starmer. He says that a Labour government would freeze council tax bills this year. Now, Starmer was speaking as he launched his party's campaign for the May local election. So this is a local election. He said the move would be funded with a proper windfall tax on the profits of the oil and gas giants. And it comes after many Labour-run councils across the country increased bills, including Croydon Council, which raised council tax by 15%. So that's sinking, people. So it's all very well and good saying he wouldn't necessarily raise it anymore, all right, but when you've got councils that are hundreds of millions of pounds in debt, how does he square that one? Joining me now is our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's got the latest on us here. So, Keir Starmer saying, I think, that what this does is make us all feel a bit better off, as opposed to what he says the Tories are doing, which just makes some people feel better off.
Yes, saying that if Labour were in government now, they would freeze the increase in council tax, which is due to come in next week, of an average of about 5%. Now, of course, that's a hypothetical. Labour are not in government now, and they haven't committed to freezing council tax if and when they are in government. But they're very keen to push the message that they are interested in supporting ordinary people, ordinary families during the cost of living crisis. And they've got a new name for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who Keir Starmer called Mr. 1%. He said Rishi Sunak's introducing tax cuts for the top 1% because, of course, they've got rid of the pension cap, that only 1% of asylum claims have been processed, and only 1% of the money lost to fraud during COVID has been reclaimed. Now, they've come to Swindon because, although there's 2 Conservative MPs here at the moment, they are hopeful of taking these seats at the next general election. They've got one of their former Labour cabinet ministers, Heidi Alexander, has come back, and she will be standing. And the current MP Robert Buckland has a majority here of only 2,500. So they're hopeful of taking this, and of course in the May 4th local elections, many other council seats up and down the country, and really pitching themselves, saying, do you feel better off after 13 years of Conservative government? And they're betting that for most people the answer to that question will be no.
There we go. Catherine, thank you very much. Catherine Forster there is bringing you the very latest when it comes to Keir Starmer's big local election pledge, which is, yes, to essentially, if we were in power now, we wouldn't be raising the council tax. I find that hard to believe when you've got likes of Slough Borough Council who've hiked it by 15% because there's 760 million quid in debt. That's before as well. Sorry, that was that's of course Slough is now 9.9%. You've got Croydon with 15%. So it's easy for me to get mixed up with my Labour-run councils, isn't it? There we go. Anyway, loads more coming your way, including, of course, that breaking news that Thomas Cashman has been convicted of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We will be live again at Manchester Crown Court in just a few minutes. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News with you all the way through until 6 p.m. We start this hour with that breaking news that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, 9-year-old girl who was shot in her own home in Liverpool. We'll bring you all the updates on that as and when we get it. And in other news, are you willing to go bankrupt in order to save the planet? Because it looks like you might have to. You're going to be potentially fined quite a bit of money if you don't make the switch from gas, but does it work? We're going to have a closer look at the impact that net zero agenda might have on your personal finances. That'll make for interesting viewing. And yes, as well, we're also going to be, of course, covering the fact that schools are going to hide from parents the fact that their child might be changing their gender. So you turn up on Parents' Evening, Sam is Samantha. I think that's an absolute liberty. You are absolutely none the wiser. We'll be talking about all of that and much, much more. And yes, the diggers have already moved in at a site that is going to be used to house migrants in Wethersfield. We'll bring you the latest on that and indeed a few other sites. There are talks of massive local picket lines. These residents are not going down without a fight. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Get your views coming in, ladies and gents. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Are you willing to pay more to go net zero? And how do you feel about the fact that schools are not going to tell you if your child changes gender? GB Views at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst with the latest from the GB newsroom. And the top story today, Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old girl who was shot in Liverpool last year. The 34-year-old killed Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her home last August. Merseyside Police has released CCTV footage of the moment Cashman chased a convicted drug dealer towards Miss Corbell's home. The jury at Manchester Crown Court also found him guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Ney and wounding Olivia's mother with intent to do grievous bodily harm. The Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy, says the investigation is still ongoing.
Brought the person responsible for Olivia's murder, Thomas Cashman, to justice. I know that will never bring Olivia back, but hopefully the family will get some small comfort in knowing the person that took their daughter away from them is now behind bars. We are still hunting down those people who enabled that murder to take place, who supplied the gun, where the gun is, and we will carry on until we identify those people responsible.
Now, the King has visited a NATO military base during his historic state visit to Germany. King Charles met with the deputy head of the German-British Battalion and other military personnel from the unit. He also met Ukrainian refugees housed at an arrival centre at Berlin's former Tegel airport. Earlier, he became the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. Speaking to politicians in both English and German, he celebrated the special bond between the two countries.
The United Kingdom and Germany are together providing leadership to secure our shared future. Today, the United Kingdom and Germany are Europe's two largest producers of power from offshore wind. These innovations are vital in combating the existential challenge of climate change and global warming, which confronts us all.
Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has announced his party will freeze council tax bills this year. He unveiled the pledge at a launch of Labour's local election campaign in Swindon. The move will be funded by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies.
Labour would freeze council tax next year using that windfall tax that hasn't been collected. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax, not a penny more than the bill you paid last year. And that is a tax cut for the 99% of working people, compared with the tax cut for the richest 1% that we get under the Tories.
Police say two men who were shot dead in Cambridgeshire last night were a father and son. The force has arrested 3 people on suspicion of conspiracy to murder, saying the incidents in Sutton and Bluntisham were linked and targeted. The force has also recovered a firearm and is now working to establish whether it was legally owned. The prisoner Charles Bronson has lost a parole board bid to be freed from jail. Bronson, who changed his surname to Salvador in 2014, is one of the longest-serving prisoners in UK's history. The parole board said it wasn't satisfied that Mr Salvador was suitable for release. Jailed when he was 22 years old, he spent most of the last 48 years in isolation while in custody. His son, George Bambi, told GB News they've accepted the decision.
I completely and utterly respect the decision that they come to. You know, that's the world that we live in. You know, these people are experts and they're the ones ultimately that make the decisions. You know, I wanted him to be released. There'll be something that will be coming out in the media within the next 24 hours that will shine a whole new, complete outlook on the whole situation with Charles Bronson.
An American reporter working for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested in Russia on suspicion of spying for Washington. Evan Gershkovich pleaded not guilty during his court appearance, according to state-owned media. The Journal says it's deeply concerned for the 31-year-old's safety and vehemently denies the allegations. The court ruled Gershkovich should be held in custody until the end of May. Climate change protesters have disrupted Humza Yousaf's debut First Minister's questions as leader.
Hoping there might be another intervention from the gallery just to stop that long rant from Humza Yousaf that didn't address the question at all, because I specifically asked... Here they go.
The presiding officer had to clear the public gallery at Holyrood after 5 interruptions. Mr Yousaf said the heckling stopped the Scottish Parliament from operating. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross challenged the new First Minister over his choice of cabinet appointments. You're up to date on GB News. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Welcome back. Our top story this afternoon is that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Olivia was shot dead at her home in Liverpool last August. Let's cross now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' North West reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been covering this case throughout. Sophie, how long did the jury take to reach their verdict then?
Well, the trial itself started at the beginning of March. We're into the 4th week now. On Tuesday, Justice Yip sent them out to begin their deliberations, and they returned this afternoon. We've heard that the jury of 10 men and 2 women took 9 hours and 3 minutes to reach their verdict, in which they found Thomas Cashman guilty on all charges. So that's the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the wounding with intent of Olivia's mother Cheryl, and 2 counts of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Now, of course, this has been an incredibly complex case. The incident itself happening back in August of last year. So here's a reminder of some of the key details of this tragic case. A tragedy that rocked this proud city and its people. On the 22nd of August last year, 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell was fatally shot in her family home in Dovecot, Liverpool.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
13 days later, Thomas Cashman was arrested and was later charged with the little girl's murder. Over the past few weeks, a jury at Manchester Crown Court has heard the details of this senseless tragedy. That night, CCTV shows shot after shot being fired at the gunman's target, Joseph Nee. Wounded, Nee tried to escape, and seeing an open door, he sought refuge there. This was the door to Cheryl Corbell's home. She'd opened it to see what was happening outside. Realising what was going on, she tried desperately to keep the two men out. Frightened, 9-year-old Olivia had come down the stairs. A shot was fired, injuring Cheryl and hitting the little girl in the chest. That shot would prove fatal to Olivia. In the following days, Merseyside police began their investigation to find the gunman, appealing to the local community for information.
The killing of a 9-year-old child is an absolute tragedy and crosses every single boundary. And I would urge them to do the right thing so we can put this person behind bars.
Meanwhile, as the hunt for the gunman continued, a heartbroken community gathered together to lay Olivia Pratt-Corbell to rest. Now, 7 months on, Merseyside police continue to push their crackdown on crime.
Beforehand, crime reporting was relatively low. Intelligence coming forward was relatively low. But since the unfortunate events, our engagement with this community has massively improved. It shows that the community want change.
It's hoped now that the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell will be a watershed moment for gun crime on Merseyside streets, so that no other family will have to feel the pain that hers did. Sophie Reaper, GB News. Well, this afternoon, Olivia's family, including her mum, brother and sister, sat in the courtroom as the jury delivered their verdict, gasping when they found out that Cashman was guilty. Since Olivia's mother, Cheryl, has said that she's ecstatic that he has indeed been found guilty by the jury. Now, this has been described as a defining moment for Merseyside police. Detective Superintendent Mark Baker has given a statement in which he spoke quite scathingly of Cashman. He said when he found out that he'd shot an innocent young girl, he should have had the courage to stand up and come forward. Instead, he chose to lie low, despite the facts that he was a dad himself. He's not worthy of walking the streets of Merseyside, and neither are those who think they can bring fear or intimidation to our communities through the use of firearms. Well, we now have that verdict in this Thomas Cashman trial. He has been found guilty, and we now believe that we'll get the sentencing for Cashman on Monday morning.
Sophie, thank you very much for bringing us all of that. Sophie Reaper there, GB News' North West reporter. So, yes, we await that sentencing, don't we, on Monday. And, well, I mean, could anything ever be long enough, really, when you look at the nature of that case? But we're moving on from that now because the government's very controversial. Excuse me, so controversial I couldn't even get my words out. New net zero plan, which has been met with intense criticism from some environmental groups. The update to the net zero strategy, which has been branded last year by the High Court as inadequate, is meant to address the imbalance between gas and electricity costs in household bills, aiming to make electricity cheaper for the long term. While some campaigners are considering taking the government to court over its new energy and climate policy, they say that the plan is not good enough. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is obviously insisting that we should be very proud of what we're doing.
People should be really proud of the UK's track record on all of this. If you look at it, we've decarbonised faster than any other major economy. Our carbon emissions have been reduced by over 40%, much more than all the other countries that we compete with. At the same time, we've grown our economy. So we've got a good track record on this, and actually today's announcement demonstrates our leadership in multiple areas that are going to help improve our energy security and get bills down.
Just have a think about that. So we've decarbonised faster than any other country, and we are now moving quicker than anyone in Europe. So Is this a benefit of Brexit as far as you're concerned? I'm not sure. A lot of emails have been coming in on this, gbviews@gbnews.uk, about how skint you're willing to be to hurtle headfirst towards a net zero target, which we might not hit anyway. I'm joined now by our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, people are quite angry about this, saying that this is too much, too fast and at too great a cost.
Yes, well, unfortunately for Grant Shapps, it seems as though people are quite angry on both sides because, as you've said, there are the energy campaigners who feel that this doesn't go far enough. And this day, when these pack of measures was announced, which was originally dubbed Green Energy Day, Grant Shapps didn't like that and he changed the name to Energy Security Day. So he was trying to put a message out there that he is taking energy security very seriously and he understands the concerns of those who are worried about the rush to net zero. Then on the other side, I mean, that obviously has angered green environmentalists. On the other side, you've got those who are very worried that some of the measures outlined in this pack will actually be very, very detrimental to those on lower incomes and could be actually detrimental to the whole aim of going carbon neutral in the end.
Can you give us some of those measures now? Because the one that really caught my eye earlier today, I imagine it might have done to a lot of people at home as well, was about gas. So households are potentially to be penalised if they do not switch away from gas under these net zero plans. I mean, this could cost people a lot of money. Add that to your electric car, add that to 15-minute cities, your ULEZ zones and all of this. It does start to add up, doesn't it? So the gas switch was one of the big ones today. What else is there?
Well, the gas switch is the one that's going to affect families the most. Essentially, how it works is that there is already a government levy on electricity bills. Basically, the government taxes people for their electricity extra so that they can use that money to invest in green energy, so the building of wind farms, etc. And that levy is going to be moved over to gas. And the problem is, of course, that the vast majority of people in the UK heat their homes with gas energy because it's much, much more convenient, it's much cheaper. There are big problems with heat pumps. Last year, the government had a target to get 600,000 heat pumps in people's homes. It only managed to get 42,000 heat pumps in people's homes. They're not particularly practical. Some of the other measures, which will also probably prove pretty controversial, is liberalising the rules about building offshore wind farms. At the moment, it's pretty tight, but the government is going to relax that legislation so that far more offshore wind farms can be built. Now, plenty of those in coastal areas say that they ruin their views, etc. The relief for them will be that Grant Shapps hasn't said anything about onshore wind farms. At the moment, there's a ban on onshore wind farms being built, and he hasn't relaxed that ban. So again, you're not really pleasing anyone there by towing the middle line.
Not at all. Just one more with you, Olivia, if that's all right. It's on something you've already said, really, but I just want some clarity on it, which is about the amount of uptake, or lack of, actually, I should say, about these heat pumps and people looking to switch from the traditional gas way of heating their homes to these heat pumps. There was a target in place, wasn't there? And they're way off.
They are way off. So the target last year was 600,000 heat pumps, getting 600,000 heat pumps installed in people's homes. They managed 42,000.
Right.
And for the last few years, the government has been giving a subsidy to people who choose to install a heat pump in their homes, £5,000. But there has been very, very low uptake on that. They're now extending that subsidy, but of course, there are plenty of Conservative MPs who are saying, well, what's the point in that? People aren't taking it up anyway. Why would they take it up?
You're just going to have to give them away.
Yeah, so that's what Craig McKinley, the net zero hawk, essentially, in the Conservative Party, is arguing. And his whole sort of caucus of Conservative MPs aren't happy at all with what's being announced.
And as you rightly identified the last time we spoke, one of the fundamental issues with heat pumps, ladies and gentlemen, is that in some homes they essentially it's very, very difficult to fit them, if you fit them at all. It could cost quite a bit as well, and it just doesn't necessarily always work. So there are some issues, some glaring issues. Sometimes I do wish you could maybe get Alan Sugar on to just do an apprentice-style review of what latest kind of anti-carbon madness has taken place, and him to just break it down, and then at the end he just fires someone. But there we go. Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley there, our political reporter. Joining me now is macroeconomist Philip Pilkington. I see I got through the word macroeconomist there, and then I stuttered on Pilkington. I mean, it's bonkers, isn't it? Anyway, there we go. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks for having me.
Right, can you enlighten me a bit, please, on the cost that all of this net zero stuff is going to have on people, ordinary, normal people? We've got everything from heat pumps to the idea now that we're going to have to pay more for electric cars. Electricity costs itself are going up as well, aren't they? Can people really afford to hurtle towards net zero in the way that the government wants us to?
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of taking a step back here. There's a lot of talk about cost of living crisis. Well, a lot of the cost of living crisis is actually an energy crisis. That's the main driving force of the cost of living crisis. Just to give some sense, since winter last year, between winter 2021-22 and winter 2022-23, which we just went through, the cost of energy for the average household doubled. Obviously, the government's guaranteeing these energies through the energy price guarantee, which is exorbitantly expensive. We know that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, wanted to wind back some of this support in the March budget, but the energy price situation is so bad that he can't. Now, the fact of the matter is, the things probably aren't going to get better on that front. Gas imports into Europe are at historic lows right now. So I don't see much evidence that the gas situation is going to get better next winter. So it just seems to me absolute madness to be talking about anything energy related that isn't about getting the cost of energy down immediately. It seems to be the most important economic policy goal for the UK right now.
OK, and is that, in your view, what our government is trying to do or not? Get the cost of energy down immediately?
I think basically they have a view on net zero. They have a view on green energy being better than other energy sources. They've had this view prior to the energy crisis, and they're trying to force fit this view into the crisis. They're trying to say, well, the crisis is due to a lack of gas because of the Russian situation, the Ukraine situation. And so the solution to this is obviously green energy because we really like green energy. But it's not obvious that the best solution is green energy. In fact, the reason that the UK is so reliant on gas is because of the fact that we've tried to greenify the economy. The hard reality of it is that any country in the world, and the two leaders in this are Germany and the UK, that try and create a very large green component to their energy grid end up pretty much addicted to gas. And the reason for that is that the wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day and the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. So you need some sort of fossil fuel to back that up. The coal is obviously forbidden because it's dirty. Nuclear, there's some taboo against that I don't fully understand. And so they go with the gas.
It might blow up, and people are worried about a Chernobyl-style incident, which I think we can all agree is very, very unlikely to happen. So I get that. Can I just ask you, and look, forgive me, and I forgive our viewers and listeners if it sounds like this is a really silly question, but I kind of want to get to the very core of this now. I get that the government is trying to say that in the long run this is going to save us money, but how long is that long run? Because if I'm the average man and woman on the street at the moment and I'm looking at levies for this, we're going to be forking out hundreds of millions of pounds for solar, for wind farms. We're going to be talking about refitting everyone's house at their own expense, by the way, with heat pumps. I'm just hearing about money going out. I'm going to have to buy an electric car. I can't get a petrol or diesel car but after 2030. I'm hearing a lot of money coming out of my bank account, and I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get any of that back.
Yeah, well, I mean, economists have a kind of basic rule. If the market isn't doing something, it probably isn't going to bring the prices down. Look, people are pretty savvy about their energy bills. They're pretty savvy, especially right now, about their energy bills, because the average energy bill is £2,500 a month, which is enormous. So if people think that there is a way to bring their energy bill down by investing in double glazing or doing something else, they will do it. And when you try and force people to do that, you're only going to raise the costs. And they say, oh, well, we're raising the costs in the short term to bring down the costs in the long term. Well, that's not obvious. That's not clear. And apparently that's not what people, individuals, think, because if they did think that, they'd be doing it themselves.
Well, and a lot of the emails I'm getting in is that we're essentially responsible for something like 1% of the carbon crisis at the minute, and as long as China and India decide that they're not really going to do much about it, and goodness knows what other countries as well, then there doesn't appear to be a huge amount of point for us doing it. That's a lot of the view that I'm getting at the minute. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show, Philip Pilkington there, who's a macroeconomist. Right, look, I'm going to move on from that. Keep your views coming in, though. I'll return to them when I've got a little bit more time later on in the show. Lots of incredibly strong views about how you feel about how much money you're willing to spend in your house to hit a net zero target that you may or may not actually agree with. But a new report by Policy Exchange has revealed that many schools could be violating their safeguarding requirements by not informing parents about their child questioning their gender identity. As our television viewers can now see, handouts depicting the genderbread man, you heard, the genderbread man, no, genderbread person. It's a genderbread person, we even got that wrong, you see, it's easily done, whose gender identity and sexual orientation are displayed as a spectrum, are being given out in classes, with just 28% of schools who responded to researchers reliably informing parents when a child said they're feeling a question of gender distress. I'm joined now by Miriam Case, who's a Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge. Miriam, thank you very, very much. If I was a parent, would be seriously considering homeschooling at this point, I think. But can it really be right that you could send a child to school one day and then find out, what, a year later or something, that child had been living as the opposite gender at school for a year and the school hadn't bothered to let you know?
Well, it's clearly not right, but sadly it is happening. And I think this report confirms some of our worst fears in terms of how widespread that is. But I've spoken to, unfortunately, a large number of parents who've had this experience of their child disclosing to somebody at school that they're uncomfortable with their body, that they are experiencing gender distress, and then being transitioned into a new gender, a new name, a name that their parents didn't give them at school. And then some parents finding out by accident that the school has done this without their knowledge or permission. And I think we need to take a step back from this. And I've done a number of interviews on this subject today. And I think what's come across is how readily we have, as a society, accepted this idea that you can have a feeling that you are not the biological sex that you were born, or that you have a gender identity that's different from your biological sex. And I think just 15 years ago, most people would have thought that was radical and outlandish. And of course, that can't be true. There are two sexes. Some people go through different forms of psychological distress at different periods of their lives, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there are two sexes. And I think the idea now that there are probably thousands of children in schools across the UK saying that they are boys when they're actually girls, or vice versa, and the teachers agreeing with them, is shocking. And I think we just need to
not telling
reflect
parents.
on that.
I'm sorry, there seems to be a massive push to destroy the notion of parental responsibility in this country. First off, everything also seems to be everybody else's fault all the time, even down to feeding your own kids at some point. But then we've got nursery schools where drag acts are brought in. Parents can't opt out of LGBTQ plus pride events for toddlers, basically. And I'm not saying they should opt out of it. I'm just saying it'd be nice to have the option, like you can with anything else, pretty much. And then you've got someone who you've probably never met and isn't a child psychologist, you know, bless her, Sandra from the geography department, and turns up and tells your kid that maybe they're born into the wrong body, and you're not allowed to question that. And then the school doesn't tell you when Sam decides to be Samantha. And we've got people online as well saying that you should go no contact with your parents if you think that you are born into the wrong body. Is there something more sinister going on here?
Well, it certainly feels like the destruction of childhood as we've previously understood it, which is that children are inherently vulnerable, and that it's the responsibility of all adults to act in the best interest of their welfare. And I say welfare, not their wishes. And I think we all know, you know, I'm a parent of 3 children. We all know if children had their way, they would eat sweets all the time. They wouldn't go to bed on time. They'd stay up all night watching videos. That's very old fashioned. They stay up all night on YouTube or something like that. You know, the idea of parenting and raising children, both our own children but across society, is not to do what they want, but to train them in the best virtues, values, character traits, skills and knowledge that will set them up for adult life. And I think where we've gone wrong is that we've suddenly decided that what a child wants is what they should have, even down to what gender they want to be. And it's absurd when you think about it. You'd never, as a child, say, well, I don't feel like doing maths today. I don't want to learn calculus. What teacher would say, oh, well, OK, then we better do what you want and we better affirm you in that, and we won't tell your parents that you're not doing maths. I mean, that's bizarre. And yet that is what we're doing in this issue.
I have got to put it to you, though, Miriam, to be fair, as a Conservative MP, your party has been in power for 13 years, and why have you let this happen?
Well, I think that is a very fair question, although I think another fair question would be, would it have been different or worse with another government? And who knows? And I think if you look across the whole of Western society, this is rampant across the West. In America, we've seen what happened in New Zealand last week. And I think, culture is upstream of politics. And sadly, we have been too slow to react.
Yeah, so what needs to happen now? Because, look, I do appreciate you admitting that we've been too slow to react. You do make a very fair point, which is that in other countries, it's probably even worse. But there's a bit of whataboutery. Obviously, people who want to vote for you want to make sure that you yourself and your party are going to do something about it right here. People could be concerned that you've let it go too far, Miriam, and it's going to be a difficult road back from this now. And parents might be thinking, well, if I send my kid off to school, they're going to have their head pumped full of nonsense and I've got no idea what's coming home afterwards. And, I mean, that is potentially quite bad for the Tories, is it not?
Yes, all fair points. And, I am a Conservative MP, but actually, more importantly, I think I'm a mum and I'm really passionate about protecting children. And that's why, I'm speaking up on this issue and so many others are. And I think, firstly, we need to just bring it out into the open. And sunlight is the best disinfectant, isn't it? And the great thing about this report, and many newspapers are now covering this issue, is we are now starting to find out what is really going on in our schools. And OK, sadly, for many families, it is too late, but it's really important to continue to dig into what's going on. And just today, the Prime Minister has announced, just a couple of hours ago, that he will be bringing forward this new guidance that's for schools to tell schools how they should be addressing children with gender distress so that this safeguarding scandal does not continue. So I think it's fair to say the Prime Minister is acting on this and is taking it incredibly seriously. Yes, of course, it should have happened earlier, but at least it's happening now.
Yeah, look, Miriam, thank you very, very much, and it's great to chat, as ever. Miriam Cates there, Conservative MP for Pellistone and Stocksbridge. It really winds me up that now we supposedly cannot trust parents to, educate their kids about gender, educate them about sex, and we cannot apparently even trust parents to be told whether or not their child has decided to change gender at school. It's absolutely bonkers. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But moving on, locals are unhappy that thousands of migrants are about to be housed in their military bases next door. And in fact, in one place, they've already moved the diggers in, so they didn't waste any time there. But can they get legal action to stop it happening? That's what I want to know. What about the human rights of the people in these areas where these camps are being set up? I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, King Charles has made history. The King and Queen consorts are on the second day of their first ever state visit, and King Charles did earlier become the first British monarch to address German politicians from the Bundestag while the Parliament is in session. So his speech celebrated the deep historical bonds and long-standing links between Germany and the UK. Let's cross now to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who's in Berlin for us. Cameron, a historic day for our king and indeed our country.
Good afternoon, Patrick. It certainly was, and it has gone down a storm here in Germany. The King and Queen Consort were splashed on a number of the German front pages this morning following the state banquet, which happened last night, hosted by the President of Germany. And today, as you mentioned, he was in the German Bundestag, the German Parliament, becoming the first British monarch in history to address German politicians. There are a number of key themes, perhaps, for his speech. First of all, he started off by paying tributes to his beloved mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, making the point that they were both in uniform and served their country during the Second World Wars. And of course, at that point, Germany and the United Kingdom were very much fighting each other, weren't they? And in the years since, we have reconciled, and that was a big theme of his speech: reconciliation and building those bridges and strengthening those bonds between our two nations. Of course, it's the British government's decision and advice as to where the king is sent on a state visit. So perhaps British officials were thinking that a European nation would be a nice touch, particularly in the face of what is going on in Eastern Europe, and that is the war in Ukraine and the ongoing Russian invasion, which is something that the king touched on in his speech quite significantly. He praised the courage of Germany for sending military equipment to to Ukraine even, and he also spoke about the Ukrainian refugees who have settled in Germany. And following his speech in the Bundestag, he actually visited a refugee centre and met some of those who had settled in Germany. The Queen Consort also did the same thing at a separate refugee centre. Another big theme was sustainability and climate change, as you can probably guess, with King Charles. The pair of them, both King and Queen Consort, visited a local organic market. The King has been at an organic farm this afternoon. Tomorrow's engagement is all about on that reconciliation theme again. They are travelling to Hamburg tomorrow morning, the King and Queen Consort. They're going to be visiting the Kindertransport Memorial, which pays tribute to the 10,000 or so Jewish children who were brought safe passage to the United Kingdom from Germany to escape the Nazis. And also we'll be visiting essentially what is the ruins of a bombed-out church, bombed by the Allies in 1943. So again, it's about building bridges, building ties, and strengthening relations between Germany and the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Cameron Walker there, GB News' royal reporter from Berlin. Oh, yes, a historic day. And it looks as though the Germans have rolled out the red carpet in a big way for our royals, which is great to see, isn't it? Nothing like a little bit of soft diplomacy. Anyway, moving on. Now, this is something that I think is interesting. I know a lot of people are up in arms about the idea of migrant hotels in their area, but now what we're seeing is the move to put asylum seekers or people who the government freely admits entered this country illegally across the channel, so some would say that makes them illegal immigrants, in RAF bases. And I wanted to know whether or not, legally, there's anything that local residents could do if they wanted to stop that from happening. We hear a lot, don't we, about the human rights of the people coming over here and people are going to be living in these bases. What about the human rights of people in these towns and villages? Well, locals living in a former military house next to RAF Scampton have hit back at the government's plans to house those thousands of asylum seekers at that disused base. That's in Lincolnshire. It was the famous home of the Dam Busters flying squad. We've been all over this story here at GB News. It's one of a number of sites that the Home Office wants to use as accommodation for thousands of migrants who arrive here illegally on small boats. And in fact, another one today in Wethersfield, the diggers have already moved in. So that's been renovated. That didn't take long. I think it was less than 24 hours or about 24 hours ago. It was properly officially announced that it was going to be a site. So, yeah, it didn't take them long, did it? But many residents in the area near Scampton have major concerns about their safety, their children's safety, the preservation of the site's heritage and their economy going forward as well. To shed some more lights on this now, I'm joined by UK immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangar. Harjap, great stuff. It's been at least 20 minutes since the last time I spoke to you. Great to have you back on the show. Thank you very much. But I want to kind of flip it on his head a bit. Oh, yeah, I know, yeah. I want to flip it... Oh, you'll be co-hosting with me soon. I want to flip it on his head a bit today, Harjap, and just ask about... To put ourselves in the position and in the shoes of people who live near some of these sites. They are concerned about local security, they're concerned about child safety, they're concerned about loads of things, right down to the way that their local culture and heritage sites might be affected. Are there any legal avenues that people can take there from a human rights perspective to say, look, I don't want this site here?
Well, the first thing that people should do is raise their concerns in writing. So in writing, anything should be done to write to the local council, write to your local councillors. You elect them. They come begging for your votes every council election. Write to your local MPs. Elections are next year. You should write to them, ask them to raise this issue in council and in Parliament, and your local MP should definitely take it up with the Home Office ministers and the relevant ministers there. And if nothing else works, then anyone has a right to ask for a judicial review or a review of this, and they can take the matter to court should they feel that the decision is unfair of them. But they'd have to justify that that decision in law would be wrong. And that they might have a problem with, and they'd be up against a fight with the government, essentially.
Yes, indeed. So is there anything to do with just general public safety they could go off? If they said, look, there are 300 children in this village, or this site is next to a primary school or a nursery school, and with the best will in the world, people who the government admits have come here illegally across the channel will be plonked here and given free reign of our town. Could anyone go to seek legal routes to say, I fear for the safety of my children? Could they go off a human rights perspective or not?
It depends whether families are being detained at a detention centre or not. Remember, under the new law, children can be detained now, and they will be detained. Families will be detained. So if that detention centre is full of families, then the argument is going to be hard to say, well, hold on, I fear for my children, because children are going to be detained in that centre as well. So you'd have to see how it would be in practice. Also, you'd have to be able to prove that in areas where there are detention centres, that there currently is high risks and there's that there's a threat. And that isn't necessarily the case. So detention centres are in Heathrow here, they're in Dover, they're in Oxford, in Cambridge, in Haslar, in Portsmouth, they're in Doncaster, in Lindholm, they're in Dungavel, in Scotland. You'd have to prove that all these areas are unsafe. And I don't think that that's currently the case. So there'd be a lot on supposition or assumption.
No, that is fascinating, actually, and that is a really interesting piece of legal insight that I must admit I hadn't thought of. If these places are full of people with children as well, I would imagine, yeah, you're right, it would probably be hard to say that there was going to be a risk to kids in the local area, wouldn't it? What about the economic damage? We're just hearing as well at Scampton there was supposed to be tens of millions of pounds of investment, I think, in that area. That presumably is now not going to happen because part of that involved the site where asylum seekers are going to be housed. Could people from the local areas say, you are going to damage us economically at all, or is that just a political decision that the government makes?
Well, the government will then say, well, we have invested in the area, it's just in the form of a detention centre. That's all, and we've created more jobs, and plus these people are going to need food, they're going to come out shopping, and, where they're going to spend in the local area, in the local shops. So the government will argue that way in retrospect, in that sort of perspective, and that will be hard once again to try and argue in respect of that. What I think may be a concern is I read somewhere that in one area there was only a population of 700 people and they're planning to house 1,500 people there. So you're essentially going to triple the population of that area. And, you might put a sort of burden on the local resources there and the local services there. But the key is government don't really listen to people. They don't listen to people's idea on policy. They care about votes and about being in power. And once they're in power, they don't care about your voice until it's next time to get a vote. And the good thing is elections are coming. So now people have to be vocal, but in the form of writing. It's easy to ignore 10 voices, but it's hard to ignore 1,500 letters. So once you've got that in writing and you can relay that to the local media, you can relay that to national media and raise a voice, that will be a concern for governments. And then MPs coming on your show, like we've just had now, will have to answer and will have to admit their mistakes and will have to answer to, yourself, Patrick, and you'll grill them on the issue and you'll hold them to account. And I think that's the only way that the media is there for a reason, the courts are there for a reason, and, elections are there for a reason. If you're not happy with what the government are doing, make your voice heard. It's called a vote. Use it.
It's true. It's true. What I thought was fascinating, though, I was talking about a different topic, about the old gender identity in school stuff and parents, and the response there from the Tory MP.
That's right, I heard that.
Yeah, well, would it not be worse under Labour? And I think that's something that we're going to be hearing a lot from the Tories when it comes to things like these migrant detention centres. Well, wouldn't it be worse under Labour? And I think the public might feel a bit trapped there with that. Look, Harjab, thank you very much. I could talk to you all day, my good man. Good sound legal advice. I will no doubt come to you the next time I'm in trouble. Harjab Singh Bangal there, who's a UK immigration lawyer, just whizzing us through the latest goings-on there. Now, OK, the King did give a speech, didn't he, earlier on in the German Parliament? And get this, he even made the local politicians laugh. I'm going to be talking about that and much, much more. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
OK, welcome back, everybody. We've covered a lot here so far about the exact nature of how much you're going to have to pay when it comes to hitting net zero targets. You've spoken about potential legal advice if you're in an area that's scheduled to have a asylum seeker detention centre in there. We've also spoken about the fact that maybe if you're a parent, are you aware that your kid's school will not tell you, quite possibly, will not tell you if your child decides to change gender. And the King made history today, so we've brought you an eclectic mix of stuff, haven't we? But here's another one for you, because Prince Harry has left the High Court on the fourth and final day of his preliminary hearing against the publisher of the Daily Mail. So he's getting into squeaky bum time now when it comes to a decision. Harry and a number of celebrities, our TV viewers will be able to see him there. Look at him, proudly walking out of court, including Sir Elton John and Liz Hurley, are taking legal action against Associated Newspapers. Joining us now from the High Court is our reporter, Ellie Costello. So, Ellie, good stuff. Are we actually going to see this go to a trial, do we think? Or what's it looking like? Is this going to be much ado about nothing? How's it shaping up?
Well, Patrick, we won't find out today, unfortunately. This is going to take several weeks before a judgment is handed down. The judge will have three choices to make. He can decide for this case to proceed to trial, he can decide to just give a judgment without it going to trial, or he can throw it out. So those are the three choices that the judge will have to make after 4 days of preliminary hearings. But it was the final day today, and we did have a surprise visit from Prince Harry. He only stayed for just over an hour, arriving just after lunchtime. I would suggest more of a symbolic appearance from the Prince today. He wants it to be seen and heard that this is an issue that he cares passionately about, and of course that is press intrusion. So perhaps no surprise that he has been here 3 days out of 4. But the one and only claimant that has been here every single day of this week is Baroness Lawrence. Now, she is the mother of the murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence. And there was a very emotional moment in court this afternoon, Patrick, that I wanted to bring to you, and that is when the witness statement from Baroness Lawrence was shared to the court. Now, she now alleges that her information was illegally accessed by journalists working for the Mail titles, and that's why she's bringing her claim. And in her statement, she writes whether she wonders, by trusting the Daily Mail, whether she let down her murdered son, Stephen. She writes in her statement that she's been played for a fool. And Baroness Lawrence was sat in the public gallery of courtroom 76, and she did look sad and strained as her witness statement was shared with the court. It gave the court a sense of the emotional impact that this illegally obtained information has had on the claimants. Of course, Associated Newspapers vehemently deny any allegation against them. They completely deny any allegations of phone tapping or illegal information gathering. They say that this case needs to be thrown out. And they say some of the articles that we're talking about here are 30 years old. And in their words, they are stale. So yes, Patrick, that is what happened in court this afternoon, the end of 4 days of these hearings. And now the judge has to make that decision. Will this proceed to a full trial or will this be thrown out? We'll have to wait and see.
We will have to wait and see. But, Ellie, thank you very much. Diligently reporting to us there, yet again, from outside the High Court. That's our national reporter, Ellie Costello. Now, are you a bit scared of AI, so artificial intelligence? We've all seen the films, haven't we, about how the world ends. And quite often it seems to be that human beings have decided to create artificial intelligence, and that has itself decided to take over. Elon Musk and other key figures in artificial intelligence are urging a halt to AI training due to fears that it could threaten humanity. All of them have signed a letter warning of the potential risks of AI and that the systems are out of control. Does anyone else feel absolutely terrified by this? Joining me now is Dr. Henry Shevlin, who's an artificial intelligence expert at the University of Cambridge. OK, so how bad is it?
I think we're at the dawn of a really powerful transformation. I would put AI up there with things like electrification in terms of being significant technological advances. And just as with any powerful technology, there are real risks and harms potentially associated with it. And so I'm glad this letter was released. I'm actually more optimistic, perhaps. I did sign the letter, but I generally tend to think that AI has the potential to be an incredible benefit to humanity. But it is also important that we get the public aware of some potential risks and harms, and we get oversight in place.
Right, OK. So let's just have a look at some of those potential risks and harms, shall we? There is the obvious one that it could take a load of people's jobs, so people who work in accounts, for example, and, well, pretty much any industry. What I am aware of is that people are trying to invest in AI technology that can be newsreaders, which is why I try to inject as much chaotic energy as possible into this show so that you can't replicate this, OK? But what are some of the pitfalls to AI?
So I think you're absolutely right. Automation is potentially one harm that's caused by AI. But I think it's also important in discussions about automation to remember what automation is really doing, which is making goods and services cheaper. In some cases, the public will happily consume more and more of those goods so that we don't actually see total losses in employment. If you look at, for example, the British textile industry in the 19th century, that was an area where we saw massive amounts of automation, increasing technology being used to improve productivity. But people were happy to keep on just buying more and more pairs of clothing as a result. Now, I think that is one possible scenario for a lot of domains where AI is likely to be employed. In other domains, we will see job losses, but we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a future little star of the news behind you as well, I think, there. So it looks like you might have your hands full. Maybe you could generate an AI parenting, a parenting thing, I think. But there we go. But yeah, anyway, well, look. So do you think that them signing something to stop Halt AI could actually be, is it good or is it too late? What do you think?
I think a 6-month moratorium is unlikely, perhaps, but, you know, if you don't ask, you don't get. What I do think we should be hoping for is something more like the kind of regulation we have around nuclear power. Things like the International Atomic Energy Agency, which can vet nuclear power in different countries to make sure that it's being rolled out safely, appropriate waste disposal protocols are being used, no one's using it to develop weapons, and so on. And I think actually nuclear power is a good model for thinking about AI. Obviously, nuclear power can bring significant benefits. There are significant risks as well, as we've seen in places like Chernobyl. But there's also been quite a lot of fear-mongering about nuclear power over the years, and perhaps some of that was unrealistic. You know, if more countries had adopted the French model in the 1970s of replacing coal plants with nuclear plants, a lot of us would be in a better place today, I think, whether you're concerned about the environment or just about dependency on foreign energy. So I think if you want a simple model, I think that's a useful way to think about it, like nuclear power.
Look, thank you very, very much. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we talk about this. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Dr. Henry Shevlin there, who's an artificial intelligence expert at the University of Cambridge, and a little cameo appearance as well from a little artificial intelligence expert earlier as well. So there we go. Anyway, right, right, we're moving on now, people. So Britain's most notorious prisoner, Charles Bronson, has lost a parole board bid to be freed from jail. Bronson has spent most of the last 48 years in prison for a series of violent attacks after being jailed in 1974 for armed robbery. Inside jail, he's carried out a series of even more violent attacks and has taken prison guards and fellow inmates hostage. George Bamby, who's Charles Bronson's long-lost son, gave us his reaction to the decision a little earlier.
The problem is, you know, there's been, you know, so much in the past that's been going on. You know, it's very difficult for a parole board to sit there and say that they can 100% categorically release him without any, you know, prospect of him, you know, committing any violence. And, you know, I know Charlie's worked really hard in prison. He's done everything that he possibly can to prove himself. But ultimately, you know, they've got guidelines to follow. And that's...
Yeah, well, there we go. Right, OK, so that's that latest news there, that Charles Bronson is going to stay in prison. So there we are. And I think we can all wait with bated breath what that's going to be in terms of the next 24 hours, the big news about why he should have been released. But moving on. Yes, Thomas Cashman, this was our big breaking story of the day, has been convicted of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We will be live at Manchester Crown Court in just a few minutes for the update on that, as, of course, we await sentencing. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good evening, everybody. It's just gone 5 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys right here on GB News, and we start with the news that broke right at the top of this show, which is that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. We'll bring you the developments from right outside Manchester Crown Court. In other news, are you willing to bankrupt yourself in order to pursue our net zero agenda? You will shudder when I tell you the true cost of the latest announcements from our government. It's not a pretty picture, people, let me tell you that much. And yes, as well, we're also going to be talking, of course, about the fact that parents are aghast because schools are not going to tell them if their child decides to act as another gender. So basically, parents are going to be kept in the dark about this. How do you feel about that? I'd be livid if I was a parent, I think. And one final story as well. The diggers have moved into migrant site that is a former military base, is going to be used to house people who came here illegally across the channel. We'll be talking about all of that and much, much more. I'm Patrick Christys. Stay tuned. Yeah, the 2 big ones in the inbox today, GBViews at gbnews.uk, are you willing to pay more in this pursuit of net zero? And should schools definitely tell parents if their child decides that they want to live in a different gender? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But right now, here's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight. As you've been hearing, a man has been found guilty of the murder of a 9-year-old girl who was shot in Liverpool last year. Olivia Pratt-Corbell was murdered in her own home last August, and her mother was also injured in the attack. Merseyside Police has released CCTV footage of the moment Thomas Cashman chased a convicted drug dealer towards Miss Corbell's home. Olivia was killed just moments later. The jury at Manchester Crown Court also found the 34-year-old guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee. The Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Serena Kennedy, says the investigation is still ongoing.
Brought the person responsible for Olivia's murder, Thomas Cashman, to justice.
I know that will never bring Olivia back, but hopefully the family will get some small comfort in knowing the person that took their daughter away from them is now behind bars. We are still hunting down those people who enabled that murder to take place, who supplied the gun, where the gun is, and we will carry on until we identify those people responsible.
The King has visited a NATO military base during his historic state visit to Germany. King Charles met with the deputy head of the German-British battalion and other military personnel from the unit. He also spoke with Ukrainian refugees, telling them, "I'm praying for you," as he condemned the unimaginable suffering caused by Russia's invasion of their homeland. Earlier, King Charles became the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. Speaking to politicians in both English and German, he celebrated the special bond between the two countries.
The United Kingdom and Germany are together providing leadership to secure our shared future. Today, the United Kingdom and Germany are Europe's two largest producers of power from offshore wind. These innovations are vital in combating the existential challenge of climate change and global warming, which confronts us all.
His Majesty King Charles. Now, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has announced his party will freeze council tax bills this year. He unveiled the pledge at a launch of Labour's local elections campaign in Swindon. The move will be funded by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies.
Would freeze council tax next year using that windfall tax that hasn't been collected. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax, not a penny more than the bill you paid last year. And that is a tax cut for the 99% of working people, compared with the tax cut for the richest 1% that we get under the Tories.
Police say two men were shot dead in Cambridgeshire last night, were father and son. The force has arrested 3 people on suspicion of conspiracy to murder, saying the incidents in Sutton and Bluntisham were linked and targeted. The force has also recovered a firearm and is now working to establish whether it was legally owned. The notorious prisoner Charles Bronson has lost a parole board bid to be freed from jail. Bronson, who changed his surname to Salvador in 2014, is one of the longest-serving prisoners in the UK's history. The parole board said it wasn't satisfied that Mr Salvador was suitable for release. Jailed when he was 22 years old, he spent most of the last 48 years in isolation while in custody. And his son, George Bambi, told GB News earlier the family's accepted the decision. Now, the Duke of Sussex has left the High Court in London as the final day of the privacy hearing against the Daily Mail publisher comes to an end. Harry and other celebrities, including Sir Elton John, have accused associated newspapers of unlawfully gathering their private information. The publisher denies the allegations and says the legal challenges have been brought far too late. An American reporter working for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested in Russia on suspicion of spying for Washington. Evan Gershkovich pleaded not guilty during his court appearance, according to state-owned media. The Journal says it's deeply concerned for the 31-year-old's safety and vehemently denies the allegations. The court ruled Gershkovich should be held in custody until the end of May. And just lastly, 9 people have been killed in a crash involving 2 Army helicopters in the United States. The vehicles were attending a routine training mission over the state of Kentucky. They were operated by the 101st Airborne Division, with 5 soldiers in one helicopter and 4 in the other. We'll bring you the latest on that when that news comes to us. You're with GB News. That's the news for now. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Good evening, everybody. Now, our top story today is that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Olivia was shot dead at her home in Liverpool last August. We can cross now to Manchester Crown Court and speak to GB News' North West reporter Sophie Reaper. Now, Sophie's been covering this case throughout. Sophie, thank you very much. How long did it take the jury to reach this verdict, then?
Well, the trial itself began at the start of this month. We're into the 4th week now. On Tuesday, Justice Yips sent the jury out to begin their deliberations. They had all day yesterday. They came back in this afternoon where they delivered their verdicts. The jury was comprised of 10 men and 2 women, and it took them 9 hours and 3 minutes to reach that guilty verdict. So we now know that Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, the wounding with intent of Olivia's mother Cheryl, and 2 counts of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life. Now, this has been obviously very complex. It happened originally months ago, back in August of last year. So here's a little reminder of some of the key details that the jury at Manchester Crown Court have been hearing over the past few weeks. A tragedy that rocked this proud city and its people. On the 22nd of August last year, 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell was fatally shot in her family home in Dovecot, Liverpool.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
13 days later, Thomas Cashman was arrested and was later charged with the little girl's murder. Over the past few weeks, a jury at Manchester Crown Court has heard the details of this senseless tragedy. That night, CCTV shows shot after shot being fired at the gunman's target, Joseph Nee. Wounded, Nee tried to escape, and seeing an open door, he sought refuge there. This was the door to Cheryl Corbell's home. She'd opened it to see what was happening outside. Realising what was going on, she tried desperately to keep the 2 men out. Frightened, 9-year-old Olivia had come down the stairs. A shot was fired, injuring Cheryl and hitting the little girl in the chest. That shot would prove fatal to Olivia. In the following days, Merseyside police began their investigation to find the gunman, appealing to the local community for information.
The killing of a 9-year-old child is an absolute tragedy and crosses every single boundary. And I would urge them to do the right thing so we can put this person behind bars.
Meanwhile, as the hunt for the gunman continued, a heartbroken community gathered together to lay Olivia Pratt-Corbell to rest. Now, 7 months on, Merseyside police continue to push their crackdown on crime.
Beforehand, crime reporting was relatively low. Intelligence coming forward was relatively low. But since the unfortunate events, our engagement with this community has massively improved. It shows that the community want change.
It's hoped now that the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell will be a watershed moment for gun crime on Merseyside streets, so that no other family will have to feel the pain that hers did. Sophie Reaper, GB News. Well, Olivia's family, including her mum, her brother and her sister, sat in the courtroom this afternoon gasping as they heard that guilty verdict. Mum has said since that she's ecstatic that Cashman has indeed been found guilty. Now, Cashman, on the other hand, has always maintained that he's not guilty. He's telling the court during his evidence that he's a dad, not a killer. When the verdict came in that he was indeed guilty, he shook his head, wiping a tear away, whilst his family protested, screaming and swearing that he was innocent. Now, in response to this verdict, Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner Emily Spurrell had this to say: "This senseless murder devastated our city. Sadly, it showed that there is still a contemptible minority, an underbelly of our society, who have no morals and no care for anyone but themselves and their own greed. It is vital that we unite and to make it clear they will never be welcome in our proud, caring, compassionate region. Now, we have heard that guilty verdict here at Manchester Crown Court, with Justice Yip earlier telling the court that on Monday, Thomas Cashman and Paul Russell, who we were unable to report on until now, he was charged with assisting an offender in relation to this incident. Those two men will be sentenced on Monday.
Exactly. Look, Sophie, thank you very, very much. Sophie Reaper there joining us outside Manchester Crown Court, and we await that sentencing on Monday, don't we? And I think most people would probably think that there's no amount of time that's really long enough for a crime like that, is there? Now, to the government's very controversial new net zero plan. And can I just quickly, before I get into the detail of this, give a quick shout-out to Richard in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Richard says, it's 2 hours into this show and not a single viewer email has been read out. Can we hear what the people are saying? Well, you can, Richard, actually, yes, because a lot of you have been getting in touch about this very, very controversial net zero plan, including John, who's very angry about the idea that it's not just about the cost of fitting heat pumps in people's homes, it's the fact that he thinks they don't give off sufficient heat, and it's actually quite dangerous to retrofit them in older properties. I've also got a fantastic email here from Keith, who breaks down his monthly costs and what some of this new net zero plan would mean for him. And I'm going to put that to one of my next guests. So there you go, Richard, asking you shall receive. But keep your views coming in, ladies and gentlemen. This new net zero plan has been met with intense criticism from basically both sides of it. So people who can't afford the bills anymore, and also environmental groups who want us to do more, always want us to do more, don't they? The update to the net zero strategy, which was branded last year by the High Court as inadequate, is meant to address the imbalance between gas and electricity costs in household bills, aiming to make electricity cheaper for the long term. While some campaigners are considering taking the government to court over its new energy and climate policy, they say the plan's not good enough. The Prime Minister insists that the UK is doing the right thing.
People should be really proud of the UK's track record on all of this. If you look at it, we've decarbonised faster than any other major economy. Our carbon emissions have been reduced by over 40%, much more than all the other countries that we compete with. At the same time, we've grown our economy. So we've got a good track record on this, and actually today's announcement demonstrates our leadership in multiple areas that are going to help improve our energy security and get bills down.
OK, so there we go. I am joined now by GB News presenter Darren Grimes and environmental activist Jeff Gazar. Great stuff, both of you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this. Jeff, I'm going to start with you by putting a question from one of my viewers on, and it's from Keith, who says he's 64 years old, he's lost his job, he's on benefits, 979 quid a month he gets, £725 a month goes on rent, 105 goes on council tax. That leaves him £30 a month for electric and heating. He wants to know from you how much he can do now, what more can he do if he just wants to live? And a lot of people are thinking that with net zero going up, his bills are going to go up and everyone's going to have to pay more for these subsidies. How do you respond to people like Keith, Jeff?
Well, that's not a net zero question, that's a cost of living question. And you should address that to the government. Yes, it is, Darren. It's a cost of living question. Now, the government's put subsidies into people's pockets through council tax relief, energy support subsidies, and that's the way to go. If you want to reduce your electricity prices quicker and easier, then you should ask the Prime Minister to impose a windfall tax on energy companies who at the moment have got a license to print money. Since 1990, when Mrs. Thatcher was in power, we've achieved a 51% higher than Rishi Sunak has just told you in your clip, reduction in CO2 emissions. Funnily enough, that hasn't bankrupted the country. So we're over halfway, as the three of us sit here today, towards our 2050 target, and we haven't bankrupted the economy.
OK, Darren, I'll throw it over to you. Lots to come back there. Start with Keith for me, if that's all right, because apparently this is not a net zero problem, it's a cost of living problem.
Oh, I just don't accept that at all. I mean, energy is something that none of us can get away from, Patrick. Ultimately, the prices of things in the shops are going up because of food, for example. You need gas to actually keep things refrigerated and all the rest of it. So, of course, it's a net zero problem. I mean, Patrick, ultimately, what the Prime Minister's been saying, all this guff about rebalancing the cost of gas. I mean, electricity, right, is currently much more expensive than gas. Guess why? Because of the green and social levies actually shoved on to electricity. And he's talking about, it is true, Instead, he's talking about moving the levies onto gas instead.
All right, we'll let Darren talk,
what?
and I'll come back to you, Jeff.
I've got a novel idea, Patrick. I've got a novel idea for all of these greenies out there. How about we just stop placing a millstone around the necks of the working class and actually allowed people to achieve the cost of living that is actually affordable to them by not making energy completely insurmountable at the cost?
All right, look, Jeff, Rishi Sunak keeps banging on about how we're decarbonising faster than anybody else, and a lot of people responded to that by saying, well, there you go, we've done enough, actually, and we need to just take a back seat now, and maybe we are just allowed to live our lives and it's up to other people to catch up with us. I mean, the EU doesn't seem to be going as fast as we are.
Well, there are different countries at different rates, different economies, different abilities to pay. But everybody is committed to a 1.5% target, maybe 1.8, maybe 2% increase in climate temperatures by 2050. And unless you take this action, the cost that imposes on society is higher than the cost of investing in a net zero policy. I don't live my life by Daily Telegraph headlines. What I live my life by is facts. The levies on electricity and gas prices are, how much are they, do you think they are, a week or a month, Darren? Do you actually know how much they are?
Well,
11 quid, 12 quid,
25%. Yeah, and at that, to a lot of people, it might not be a lot to you, but it's a lot to a lot of people. Thank you very much.
It means a lot to all sorts of people. And the reason that the prices have risen in the last 18 months or so has got nothing to do with green levies. You might as well say, let's abolish VAT on energy prices, which already is at a reduced rate, as I'm sure you know. The government has decided to take money from the public purse through taxation and subsidise yours, mine and everybody else's use of electricity because of the Russian gas situation caused by the Ukraine war.
Yeah, but
simple as that.
Yeah, but that's not free money, is it? That's coming out of people's tax. We are paying for that.
Absolutely.
This is the thing,
it's
just
not
because
free
it's
money.
tax. I'll just throw it over to Darren. Sorry, but I am. Look, Jeff, forgive me. I am a little bit sick of people saying like, "Oh, well, come on, it's just coming out of the tax." Yeah, well, we pay for that, don't we, Darren? What's your view?
Well, I understand that, Patrick. Of course, we all pay for taxes, but it's the government.
Yeah, well, we do, and it's really, it impacts the working class the hardest, as we all know. I mean, Patrick, you just mentioned that we're all in this together, right? Other countries around the world are doing this as well. I mean, as you well know, I'm not one to often say nice things about Brussels, right? I often think Brussels is bananas, frankly. But even the technocrats in the EU have actually worked out, oh, hang on a minute, maybe actually it's not going to work if we ban petrol and diesel cars by 2030. Actually, maybe that's nuttier than a fruitcake. And all of these things, the chickens are coming home to roost, right? It's going to be well-heeled eco-extremists that are actually the ones that can afford to be hit by these new green taxes on gas. And it's the working class, it's your viewers, Patrick, who are going to be, pardon the pun, not insulated by all of this.
Jeff, I've got to ask, when we look at things in the round, right, so let's say at some point I'm going to have to get an electric car, all right? I drive a diesel at the minute. It wasn't that long ago we were told to drive diesel cars, so it's going to cost me about 10 quid every time I take it off the drive in London, so I'm going to have to get a new car, so that's money, right? And then if I owned a place and it was gas there, I'd probably have to look at introducing some kind of heat pump. Well, let's say that place was old, or if I was lucky enough, so chance to be a fine thing, very large, then maybe that wouldn't actually do me too much good, so I'd be paying for that. Electricity, etc., is going up anyway. I mean, there just seems to be a lot of outlay here, cost-wise, for people. And I just think when you look at it in the round, can you understand, Jeff, why people are thinking, well, I don't really want to do this, I wouldn't really vote for this?
Patrick, I can understand why they don't want to do it. You can currently get a government subsidy of £5,000 towards a heat pump. You have to pay some yourself. Over an 8-10-year period, that would be cheaper to run than a gas or electric equivalent.
Taxpayers are still paying. You keep banging on about subsidies, Jeff. That's tax. That comes from taxing people more money, doesn't it?
It does, and you will get the payback of that investment.
OK, all right, Darren, final word to you. I can see you shaking your head. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, basically the whole premise of this plan, I use that in inverted commas. Let's not forget that this was put through, net zero was put through by Theresa May without a vote and without a plan. This whole idea of creating price signals to shift people off gas and onto heat pumps and things like that, it's a bit like trying to create price signals to actually shift people off booze, Patrick. Ultimately, people are going to want a drink and people will want to keep warm via gas. Most of us can't have these massive heat pumps, so we're going to have to pay the extra costs. I can't have a heat pump in this flat, so I tell you what, I reckon we actually ought to capture the hot air that's coming from your guest and from the House of Commons, because maybe that'll keep her all warm for a generation.
All right, I'll see you both at Heat Pumps Anonymous very, very shortly. Look, both of you, thank you very, very much. Enjoyed that. I was GB News presenter Darren Grimes and environmental activist Jeff Gazzard. It's popped off in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Loads of you have been getting in touch as well. And GB News, of course, is the People's Channel, and it's your voices that matter the most. So joining me are GB News viewers Sue Cox from Suffolk and Lee Harris from Bristol. Yes, fantastic, good stuff. Ladies first, as ever. Sue, I'll start with you. How do you feel? How do you feel about the idea that you're going to have to get a heat pump?
Well, I want to respond to Jeff first and just say that the cost of living crisis is driven almost 100% by the cost of fuel, because everything that's produced, from going on holiday and getting on a plane to having something delivered to your supermarket, that is all impacted by the cost of fuel. In terms of powering up Britain, I think it is just another example of government posturing to placate the few and infuriate the masses. I'm not prepared. I'm not happy about paying more money, and I think electricity will not get cheaper. How can it possibly get cheaper?
Well,
in the long term.
I don't see how it... Well, you're right. I don't really see how it will, personally. And also, as well, I don't like the idea of increased control that it could have. If everyone's driving electric cars, etc., then, you know, if the government can say, well, you're only allowed to charge them at this time for the national grid, I just don't like it. I don't like it. Lee, when we left the European Union, I suspect that many people thought that we would be able to do our own thing, and that mean that we might have fewer rules and regulations. Not just go. Well, I don't think many people thought it would lead to us actually doing more towards a net zero agenda than the European Union, for goodness sake, Lee.
I mean, it's insane, Patrick. I mean, it feels to me like the government are literally declaring a net zero war on the population at the worst possible time. I mean, like most people, I rely a lot on gas at home. You know, we've got a gas cooker, we've got a fridge. We use gas a lot. And we've only literally upgraded our boiler in the last few years to a combi boiler to make it more efficient. We spent thousands on that. I have a diesel car, which I've had for a long time, simply because at the moment I don't have the spare cash to buy a new car. So I've got a diesel car. I'm being hit by increased diesel costs while petrol is staying the same at the moment. I also run my own business. We also have the highest tax burden in half a century. I mean, oh, and by the way, I've just had to remortgage as well at the higher rate. So I went for a tracker mortgage in the end for 2 years because I think that the rates are coming down, but I'm having to pay a higher rate than that. It genuinely feels like, as a member of the public, that we're just being attacked from every single angle. It's madness.
Yeah, and we are a bit pressed for time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the final word over to you, Sue. I'm aware that you will have spoken longer to Lee, but I know Lee's very progressive, right? So he'll be bang in favour of this. But Sue, can I ask, do you feel as though our politicians are out of touch with exactly how much their policies are costing you as a person?
I think they're completely out of touch, and the fact that our Prime Minister is a multi-millionaire obviously doesn't help that. Everybody I speak to have got the same problems, have got the same views, and the government, as I said, they are placating the few and driving the masses mad with every policy. This is just hot air. I think Shapps and Sunak, between them, could actually provide enough hot air to keep this country going.
Look, lovely stuff. Lee, I'm sorry I've not got time to go back to you, my good man, but thank you. Sue, great stuff. Sue Cox from Suffolk, Lee Harris from Bristol, and time for one quick email from Tony saying heat pumps subsidised for people who can afford the heat pumps, and that is a contender for email of the day. I think that sums it up, doesn't it? If you've got money, you get a subsidy, and you can fit the thing that's going to cost everybody else a load of money down the line because they can't afford to get a subsidy. It's just bonkers. It's bonkers. It's bonkers. Anyway, right, moving on. Prince Harry was back in court today, and his court case against the publisher of the Daily Mail continued. Will it actually go to trial, though? Will it actually, or will it get thrown out? I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I've got a lot on the agenda. I am starting now with Prince Harry, though. He's left the High Court on the 4th and final day of the preliminary hearing against the publisher of the Daily Mail. So it's getting to squeaky bum time now for Harry, who our viewers will be able to see leaving the court there. He and a number of other celebrities, including the usual suspects, Sir Elton John. We've also got Liz Hurley, though. They're taking legal action against associated newspapers. And joining us from the High Court is our national reporter, Ellie Costello, who's been glued to this trial, glued to it, to the preliminary hearing of it. OK, so what's going on? We're getting towards decision time, are we, Ellie?
We certainly are, Patrick. 4th and final day of this preliminary hearing. It is all over now. The judge has got to go and make a decision now. We should hear from him in the next few weeks or so. But we just have a surprise visit from Prince Harry on the 4th and final day. He only stayed for just over an hour. He appeared in the side entrance just after lunchtime and left about an hour later. But I would suggest that that was a symbolic appearance from Prince Harry. He wants to be seen by the media heading into this court hearing. This is something that he feels passionately about, and he did seem very engaged across these few days. He did have a notepad in front of him, and he was liaising quite often with his legal advisors who was sat next to him. He did seem to want to be across the legalities. And in court this week, we did get an indication as to why he decided to travel the 6,000 miles from California to be here for just the preliminary hearings. Bear in mind, we're not even at a trial stage yet. It was shared in his witness statement. This was written by him earlier on this year, and it said, "I'm bringing this claim because I love my country and I remain deeply concerned by the unchecked power, influence and criminality of Associated. The British public deserve to know the full extent of this cover-up, and I feel it is my duty to expose it." Well, very important for me to say at this point that Associated Newspapers vehemently deny any of these allegations in that witness statement and across the entire case. But you can sense the strength of feeling there from Prince Harry, and perhaps that suggests why he's been here for 3 days out of 4. But we heard the closing arguments today, Patrick. Essentially, the barrister for the claimants saying that his high-status claimants that he's representing have been victims of abhorrent criminal activity and gross breaches of privacy. We're talking about things like phone hacking, bugging cars and homes, tapping into credit card statements and also accessing hospital records by means of deception. That's what they're saying. And Associated Newspapers is saying that this has all gone on for a long, long time now. In terms of the allegations have been going on for a long, long time now. Some of the articles are 30 years old, the ones that are being brought up by the claimants, and they said they're stale, they can't be brought, and the whole thing should just be thrown out. So that is what both sides are saying. The judge has heard all of the arguments now. He's now got to go away. He's got 3 options on the table. He's going to take this to trial, he's going to throw it out, or he's going to make a judgment without trial. Those are 3 options on the table. It could take several weeks for him to make that decision, but he has warned if this goes to trial, this could go on for a substantial period of time.
Yes, indeed, which unfortunately for you, Ellie, might mean that you have to stand there for a substantial period of time. That's Ellie Costello there, our national reporter outside the High Court, whizzing you through the latest in the preliminary hearing for Prince Harry. Now, moving on. Schools have been slammed for not telling parents that their kids could be trans. If I was a parent, I'd be absolutely livid at this. More detail to come. And you are not going to believe what one man is using to fill the potholes in his local area. I make no excuses for being obsessed by potholes, people. But first, your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Well, let's begin this bulletin with some breaking news we've had in the last few minutes. We're hearing reports from the White House in the United States. They've issued a statement saying US citizens residing or travelling in Russia should depart immediately. It also says the targeting of American citizens by the Russian government is unacceptable. That's all we have from the White House at this stage in that statement. Short, brief and to the point. To repeat for you, the White House issuing a statement saying US citizens residing or travelling in Russia should depart immediately, saying the targeting of American citizens by the Russian government is unacceptable. Well, this follows the arrest of an American reporter working for the Wall Street Journal, being arrested in Russia on suspicion of spying for Washington. Evan Gershkovich pleaded not guilty during his court appearance. That's according to state-owned media. The Journal saying it's deeply concerned now, though, for the 31-year-old's safety, and it vehemently denies all the allegations. The court ruled Gershkovich could be held in custody until the end of May. Well, also in the news today, Thomas Cashman has been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old girl who was shot in Liverpool last year. The 34-year-old killed Olivia Pratt-Corbell in her own home last August. Merseyside Police has released CCTV footage of the moment Cashman chased a convicted drug dealer towards Miss Corbell's home. The jury at Manchester Crown Court also found him guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee and wounding Olivia's mother with intent to commit grievous bodily harm. The Chief Constable of Merseyside, Serena Kennedy, says the investigation is ongoing.
Brought the person responsible for Olivia's murder, Thomas Cashman, to justice. I know that will never bring Olivia back, but hopefully the family will get some small comfort in knowing the person that took their daughter away from them is now behind bars. We are still hunting down those people who enabled that murder to take place, who supplied the gun, where the gun is, and we will carry on until we identify those people responsible.
And the King has visited a NATO military base during his historic state visit to Germany, meeting personnel belonging to the German-British battalion. He also met Ukrainian refugees at a centre, telling them, "I'm praying for you," and he condemned what he called the unimaginable suffering caused by President Putin's invasion of their homeland. Earlier, King Charles became the first British monarch to address the German Parliament. Speaking to politicians in both English and German, he celebrated the special bond between the two countries.
The United Kingdom and Germany are together providing leadership to secure our shared future. Today, the United Kingdom and Germany are Europe's two largest producers of power from offshore wind. These innovations are vital in combating the existential challenge of climate change and global warming, which confronts us all.
His Majesty King Charles. Well, that's all from me for now. I'm back in half an hour. Now back to Patrick.
Yes, I just wanted to return, actually, to what was our top story. In fact, it broke shortly before I came on air at 3 o'clock, which is the case of Thomas Cashman. He's now been found guilty of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. She was sadly shot dead in her home last August. But this case was, look, terrible, obviously, and in many ways as well fascinating, because it opened up, it shone a light, I think, into gang culture, the total lack of ethics, obviously, that is around that, firearms, etc. I'm joined now by Dr David Lowe, who's a former detective sergeant with Merseyside Police. Look, thank you very much for joining me on this. I can remember, it seems like a heck of a long time ago, those desperate pleas. Please, come on, someone's got information, and it was obvious it was something to do with the criminal underworld and the world of drugs, etc. And it took a heck of a long time for them to get this guy in custody. What is it about... is there just a no-grass culture that has led to people like Thomas Cashman being essentially protected by other vile criminals for so long? What's gone on here?
Yeah, and I think it's in certain parts of Liverpool. I think and it's not just Liverpool, I think we can go to any major city, Patrick, where there is that fear that if they do inform or grass, that there'll be retribution by the criminals. But what was really interesting in Olivia's case was, well, first of all, there is still a thing where she's 9 years of age, and that I think that changed a complexion on the investigation. But the whole community, and when I say community, I don't just mean the area of Dovecot where she lived, the whole city came together to encourage people who had any information to come forward. It even got to the stage where the managers and footballers from Everton and Liverpool Football Club were saying, this is not grassing, and we're encouraging people. And so when that information, that intelligence did come into the investigators, that they could then turn into evidence, I think then we started to see this particular investigation progress at a greater pitch. But you're right, Patrick, it was very difficult, certainly in that first week or two.
I think, by the way, absolutely 100% correct that this kind of stuff, possibly, hopefully not to this extreme, but is happening in every single city. It's certainly not just a Liverpool thing. But when it comes to Liverpool now, specifically, how easy is it to get a gun, and how big is the drug problem?
Well, first of all, it's still difficult to get a gun. And, of course, one of the concerns, we heard Serena Kennedy, the Chief Constable, talking earlier. The investigation is still ongoing simply because these two firearms are still outstanding. So it is one of those where it's not so much about purchasing them, it's about passing them on from criminal group to criminal group. So that's one of the issues, and that's why the investigation is still going. But it's still difficult, Patrick, to physically get hold of one of these firearms. As regards the sort of gang issue, well, I've certainly seen a change from when I was serving and now, because I've been retired a good few years now, but I'm obviously my areas of research at Leeds Beckett is looking at criminal law, policing, and my other areas, terrorism and security. So I have seen a change in culture, if you like, from the offenders. I remember years ago, it was one of those where if they use firearms, they would use it on each other. We seem to have gone to this culture now where, I mean, from years ago with Rhys Jones, we saw it. We've seen it now with Olivia, where the the perpetrators with the firearm don't really seem to care who's in the crossfire. And that sort of moved the goalposts a little bit, I think, in how these gangs operate. Yes, there are gangs, but fortunately, Merseyside Police, and it's not because I'm a former Merseyside Police and I live in Liverpool, but Merseyside Police have been, from the inspectors, have been commended for their work, actually, on serious organised crime and on the gang culture. So, I mean, August was a bad month. We had 3 shootings and 3 murders, unprecedented. But if you look at the bigger picture, I think what would also be useful is give the figures of those that were being prevented, look at the arrests that's gone on, the conviction. I think that's important, so we get that sense of balance.
I think the bigger picture is always important, and I know that the police have actually come out and said, look, this is going to reinvigorate their desire to tackle the gangs, to tackle the gun problem, the drug problem, etc., so that Olivia's... well, she didn't die in vain, basically, really, that something can come out of this. Dr David, thank you very much. Dr David Lowe, who's a former detective sergeant with Merseyside Police. That was our top story of the day. It broke shortly before I came on air. Thomas Cashman, found guilty, not sentenced yet, sentencing on Monday, found guilty of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell, 9 years old. Well, I'm going to move on from that now, though, and return to another one of our top stories, actually. So can you believe that some schools aren't telling parents that their kids are questioning their gender? So think about this. You drop your kid off at school, you rock up at parents' evening a year later and it turns that Sam is now Samantha and you were none the wiser. Is that not an absolute liberty? What's going on? I'm Patrick Christys and this is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, a new report by Policy Exchange has revealed that many schools could be violating their safeguarding requirements by not informing parents about their child questioning their gender identity. As our television viewers can now see, handouts depicting the gingerbread person, I can't get it right, whatever it is, anyway, whose gender identity and sexual orientation are displayed as a spectrum, had been given out to classes, and I think this is really the most pressing one. It's certainly the one we're about to have a big debate on now, which is that just 28% of schools who responded to this study said that they are reliably informing parents when a child said that they had feelings of gender distress or indeed chose to change their gender. So why wouldn't you tell parents? Do parents not have a right to know about all of this stuff? Joining me now to go head-to-head is Peter Tatchell, LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, and GB News presenter Calvin Robinson. Look, thank you very much, both of you. Calvin, I'll start with you. Do parents have a right to know if their child goes to school and says that they are having thoughts about changing their gender?
First of all, what a show you've had today, Patrick. Absolutely fantastic. I saw you had Miriam Cates on here earlier, articulating this argument far better than I possibly could, but I'll give it a go. Of course, parents have a right to know. They don't just deserve to know, they have a right to know. It's a parent's job to educate a child. Schools are there to supplement that education, to help parents, not to replace parents. Now, for a child to self-ID as something that they are not, and for the school to affirm that self-identity is dangerous. But for the school to not inform parents of that is a safeguarding concern. They wouldn't do it with any other aspect of life, from eating disorders to any other mental illness. Why do they do it with body dysmorphia?
Peter, I'll let you respond to that. I mean, if I was a parent, I'd be absolutely livid to not be told by the school that my child was having issues surrounding their gender, Peter.
Well, first of all, Calvin is wrong. Being trans is not a mental illness. We know from scientific evidence that trans identity has roots in genetics and brain processes and brain structures. So it has a clear biological basis. The second thing I'd say is that the number one priority is the welfare of the young person. That comes first. And there will be circumstances where informing parents about a child being trans would result in that child being physically and violently assaulted. We know that. We also know that where young trans people are affirmed and supported in their gender identity, they have much higher levels of happiness and self-satisfaction. They do better at school. They are all round better people.
I'm sorry, but you can't come on television and make things up and say, we know this, you know that.
One at a time. Calvin, you go, Calvin. All right, go on.
Right, so this, I mean, Peter has
just let Peter go. Sorry, I'm struggling to hear one of you here, so Peter, you go.
Peter, you talk.
So the number one priority is to make sure that young trans people are happy, they don't self-harm, and of course, wherever possible, parents should be informed.
Right, OK, so you finished now. Go on, Calvin, come back to that then.
School teachers are not medical professionals. They are not qualified to make the decision whether a child is becoming a boy or a girl or changing gender. That is not up to them. They are not trained for that. I know as a qualified teacher that we're not trained for that. Schools should be approaching parents and medical professionals and other agencies to have a wider conversation about this. If there is gender dysphoria going on or gender dysmorphia and a child has a serious mental illness, and it is a mental illness, to come on TV and say, no, it's not. We know from genetics that people change. Don't talk rubbish. Don't make things up. To suggest that is dangerous. And for why it's dangerous, because we have young boys identifying as girls going and taking part in female sports, which is dangerous for the girls that they're competing against. We have young boys going into girls' toilets and changing rooms, which is an invasion of privacy.
This is
sexually inappropriate.
This is the other angle to it. And Peter, I would like to know, as a parent, even if my child was not going through any kind of gender issues whatsoever, whether or not in my own child's changing room there was going to be a boy introduced into that girls' changing room. I feel as though, personally, for me, there would be a right to know that. Can I just play a quick clip, actually? I believe we've got this clip. So, Peter, I'll get you to comment off the back of this clip, because my concern is there appears to be a push to remove the parents from anything gender-related for children. And indeed, people like this guy, Jeffrey Marsh, online, who wants kids to go no contact with their parents. I can't believe I've got a little clip of him now.
Your parents made mistakes. You can't blame the parents. Of course they can. I'm just concerned about the children. Should I go no contact with my mom? I will tell you about going no contact. Don't worry about hurting a parent's feelings.
Do you not think that's a bit weird, Peter?
The first thing to say is that person is not representative. He or she is not a professional. All the trans organisations that I know work with parents. So I know Mermaids has come in for a lot of stick, but we know that Mermaids, in all its work, worked with parents, and parents were 90+% happy with the way in which their children had been treated. Now, I agree, as I said earlier, parents should, wherever possible, be consulted. And in many cases, when parents are consulted, they will support the decision of their child. And they, as Kelvin says, they will then get in touch with medical professionals, and they will further investigate and advance their child's interest. It's always number one priority, what is in the best interest of the child. Every parent wants that. No parent wants, maybe parents don't want a trans child, but even those that have one do not want them to suffer.
OK, look, both of you, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there, I think, now, because it's we're out of time. But I've thoroughly enjoyed that discussion. I doubt we'll have to get you back on, because this issue is not going away anytime soon. As Peter Tatchell there is LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation and GB News presenter Kelvin Robinson. Right, no doubt the emails will be flooding in thick and fast on that. gbviews@gbnews.uk, and I'm very keen to hear from you as well. John says Calvin is spot on, parents. Parents should be told. I'm just inclined to think that they should be. Parents should be told, surely, whether or not their child wants to change gender. Does the school really have a right to hold back on that? I'm joined now by Michelle Dewberry. It's that time of the day already. Michelle, you're right.
No, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? I'm going to be picking up, among other things, on that issue that you've just been talking about there. I found that really interesting conversation. That fella, that Jeffrey fella that you've just put videos of, it's all right, Peter saying, oh, he's not a professional, whatever. What he is a very influential person.
Absolutely.
Whilst you were playing those videos, I was on a little look. 4.4 million people have seen one of those videos, another 3 million pretty much there and thereabouts on one of the others. So it's not professionals that are influencing these people obvious all the time, is it? One of my panel, by the way, doesn't think I should be debating this issue. He says there's way more important things going on in the country.
It's a good job it's not his show, then.
Well, exactly. But I actually think that this is something that we have to be aware of, get across and stop.
Absolutely.
I mean, a teacher, it's there to teach your kids, not to, you know, if your kid comes to you and says, oh, I think I'm a boy or whatever, the teacher going, oh, yeah, OK, we'll call you Dave.
Where do they get off? I'm sorry, but where do they get off on the idea that parents are responsible enough to create the baby, to keep it alive for however old it has to be to go to a school, to have its head pumped full of all this stuff, but then the parents, would actually pose a danger to the child to find out whether or not they were born into the wrong body?
Well, I mean, not on my watch. And it comes down to how involved you are as a parent. I would never, in a month of Sundays, I would not allow my child to be kind of taught this stuff and me to be alienated from it. No, thanks. Hey, by the way, I want to talk about shoplifting as well.
Oh, good stuff. All right, OK, I've apologised for that. Anyway, Michelle Dewberry, coming your way next with Tuesday. I've been Patrick Christys. I'll see you tomorrow at 3. Take it easy.
Afternoon, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Tomorrow, it's going to be a blustery one on the south coast of England and south coast of Wales in particular. A wet one too across much of the south, something a little brighter further north. Why the wet and windy weather? Well, here's the reason why. A little area of low pressure that's been spinning up through this morning and is now drifting towards the south. The rain will arrive through the evening across the southwest and continue to spread further north. Ahead of that, we've still got some lively showers around. Many of us have seen some sunshine through the day. There's the rain spreading in. It's the wind